Did you ever look around your childhood home in the 1980s and realize that some things marked your family as struggling? These were the items, habits, and choices that quietly told the world your family was doing without. So, what everyday signs revealed more than anyone wanted to admit? Trapper keepers were not just school supplies, they were status symbols. With their Velcro flaps and glossy, over-the-top covers, they turned every classroom into a silent competition of who had the coolest binder. Some featured racing cars. Others showed rainbows, unicorns, or abstract laser patterns straight out of a sci-fi fever dream. Inside, everything was neatly organized. Folders, dividers, loose-leaf paper, and secret notes passed during math class. The Velcro made a loud rip every time you opened it, an announcement that learning was about to begin, or at least be attempted. Trapper keepers made you feel like you had your life together, even if your grades said otherwise. Teachers had a love-hate relationship with them. They were bulky, distracting, but undeniably effective at keeping your stuff in one place. And if you had one with a matching pencil case, you were royalty. Years later, people still remember the smell of the plastic, the feel of flipping through those laminated folders, and the thrill of sliding in a new pack of notebook paper. Trapper keepers were not just for school, they were for showing off, staying organized, and feeling like you had a little piece of the future in your backpack. A bag of plastic parachute men was enough to keep a poor kid entertained for hours. You tossed them in the air, watched the thin plastic chute open, and cheered as the soldier floated down. At least, that was the idea. In reality, the parachute tangled after a few throws. The strings knotted, the chute tore, and the little plastic man dropped like a rock. Kids untangled them again and again, determined to keep the game alive. Some kids even climbed onto garages or trees just to give their parachute men more altitude, only to watch them slam into the ground. Others tied on bigger bags from grocery stores, convinced they could make them float better. Sometimes the men were launched with slingshots or tossed from bikes, turning a flimsy toy into a dangerous experiment. They came from dollar stores or birthday party favor bags, cheap and plentiful. Kids threw them from porches, rooftops, or the tops of bunk beds, pretending they were real paratroopers. Even when they broke, the little plastic men stuck around, repurposed as army figures or random background characters in other games. Today, they are remembered as disposable toys that brought endless fun despite their flaws. Do you remember throwing a parachute man into the sky, holding your breath to see if the chute would open? Kite flying with homemade kites was another way kids turned scraps into magic. There was no trip to the toy store, no brightly colored store-bought kites, just old newspapers, a couple sticks, string, and tape. You fashioned a diamond shape, tied it tight, and prayed it would hold against the wind. On blustery afternoons, kids ran across fields or down streets, pulling the string until the fragile creation caught a gust. Sometimes it soared high, tugging against your hand like it had a mind of its own. Other times it nosedived into the dirt, crumpled, and had to be patched together before the next attempt. The laughter came either way, because the joy was in the chase, the running, and the thrill of watching something you made fly. Friends compared whose kite went higher, whose stayed up longest, or whose looked the silliest, decorated with crayons. Parents watched from porches, smiling as the sky filled with scraps of newspaper fluttering like birds. For poor families in the 1970s, kites meant freedom, creativity, and a rare kind of triumph, proof that even with almost nothing, you could make something that touched the clouds. Watch, because that wrapping paper was not one-time use. It was going in the drawer with the others, flattened, folded, and ready for its next life. The good stuff, the foil kind or the ones with glitter, was practically sacred. Birthdays, Christmas, random gifts from school, anytime you saw wrapping paper, your brain switched into conservation mode. You held it up like a map, smoothed it across the kitchen table, and pressed out the creases. If it had tape marks, that added character. You might even recognize the paper from 3 holidays ago. Same Santa, same snowflakes, same crease down the middle where it was folded around a toaster in 1984. If the paper was too torn, you cut it into smaller pieces and used it for stocking stuffers or gift tags. Some folks even ironed it. Yes, ironed wrapping paper. That is how deep the commitment went. And woe to the child who crumpled it. "Be careful with that," your mom would snap. "We can use that again." Today, people buy whole wrapping stations. Back then, we had a drawer full of wrinkled paper, tangled ribbon, and used bows with 14 pieces of tape on the back. It was not about being frugal. It was about being smart. And when you reused that same paper on your cousin's gift, they never noticed. But you knew. When your shoes... The Sears catalog dreaming ritual was its own kind of holiday. That thick book showed up in the mail like magic, full of glossy pages and promises. Toys, clothes, electronics, even furniture. Everything you could want, but probably would not get. Still, you looked, you circled, you dreamed. You and your siblings would take turns flipping through the toy section, marking pages with dog-eared corners or scribbled stars. You made lists. You imagined. You believed, just for a little while, that maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would be different. And your parents? They let you dream. Even if they knew that catalog was filled with things they could not afford. They watched you with a quiet kind of hope and heartbreak. Because sometimes they managed to pull off a miracle and get one thing from that book. Just one. Maybe it showed up under the tree. Maybe it didn't. But the ritual itself, the dreaming, the wishing, the pretending, was almost as special as the gift. That catalog was not just a shopping tool, it was a time machine, a window into a better life, a reason to believe that something new might be on the way. And even now, years later, just seeing one brings it all back. The weight of it in your lap, the excitement, the longing. It was not just a catalog, it was hope printed in full color. Kool-Aid was the poor man's soft drink in the 1970s, bright, sweet, and aggressively artificial. But when you had 5 kids and no soda money, it was a blessing in a little paper packet. You poured it into a plastic pitcher, added water and way too much sugar, stirred it until your arm hurt, and served it in jelly jars or reused margarine tubs. Grape, cherry, orange, blue. Nobody really cared about the flavor. It was cold, sweet, and felt like a treat. Parents liked it because it was cheap. Kids liked it because it looked like something better. And somehow, it always lasted just long enough to make it through dinner. Kool-Aid was more than a drink. It was an easy win. Something bright and fun when every kid wanted a metal Slinky, but poor families often ended up with the plastic version. They looked fine in the package, bright neon coils stacked neatly. But the disappointment came fast. The plastic twisted, tangled, and knotted after a few tumbles down the stairs. It lacked the satisfying weight of the real thing, flipping awkwardly instead of gliding smoothly. Once twisted, it was ruined forever, destined for the bottom of the toy box. Some kids tried stretching them across entire rooms only to snap the coils in frustration. Others wound them around wrists like bracelets, a poor substitute for jewelry. And the static electricity from all that plastic left hair standing on end, adding comedy to the failure. Still, kids tried again and again, determined to make their plastic Slinky work. They stretched it, flipped it, and 4 jacks and a ball were all you needed to pass the time, on the porch, at school, or on the living room rug when it rained. The whole set came in a plastic pouch you could get at the dime store, or maybe you just found a ball and borrowed someone else's jacks. The game was simple. Bounce the ball, scoop the jacks before it landed again, but it was never really simple. You got better every week. You went from onesies to tensies, like it was a rite of passage. The jacks made a satisfying clatter across the floor, like you were summoning something old and important. Sometimes the ball bounced too far and rolled under the couch. Sometimes you missed and called for a redo no one really gave. But you played until your knees hurt and your hands were red from slapping the ground. And when you dropped one jack and stepped on it barefoot later, well, you learned that toy pain is still pain. But you also learned precision, focus, and how to win with nothing but reflexes and floor space. It was a quiet game, but intense. especially when your pride was on the line. And for a few minutes, the world shrunk to a rubber ball, 10 tiny jacks, and whether or not you could beat your last round. For poor kids in the 1980s, building blocks often came in bags, not colorful Lego boxes. These generic bricks looked similar but never clicked quite right. You built a tower, only to watch it crumble because the pieces slipped apart. The colors were dull, often mismatched, and the plastic sharp at the edges. Castles leaned sideways, cars fell apart when pushed, and airplanes lost wings before they left the floor. Still, children worked with what they had, stubbornly stacking and rebuilding, because making something, anything, felt like magic. These blocks came from dollar stores or discount aisles, packaged in clear plastic bags with labels like building bricks or creative blocks. They lacked the polish of Lego, but they encouraged the same imagination. Kids invented their own sets, crafting houses, spaceships, or entire cities on bedroom carpets, even if the walls barely stood straight. Today, Lego sets are celebrated for their precision and themes. But back then, knockoff bricks carried their own charm. They taught kids patience, persistence, and the art of making the best out of what you had. Do you remember pressing bricks together with all your strength, only to watch your creation collapse anyway? Watching free cartoons on Saturday morning was a ritual that united kids across the country, rich or poor. But if you grew up without much, those hours in front of the television were extra special. No cable packages, no pay-per-view movies, just the handful of channels that came in through the antenna on top of the house. You woke up before your parents, poured yourself a bowl of cereal, sometimes with more sugar than milk, and planted yourself in front of the screen. Bugs Bunny, Scooby-Doo, and the rest of the lineup became your weekend friends, keeping you glued for hours while the world outside slowly woke up. The shows were free, the laughs were endless, and for those few hours you forgot about everything else. Poor families did not need fancy trips or paid entertainment when Saturday morning promised a guaranteed escape. Sometimes the television flickered or the picture went fuzzy, and you had to fiddle with the antenna until the signal came back. Sometimes the commercials were almost as entertaining as the shows, with jingles that stuck in your head long after the weekend ended. Looking back, it was simple, almost too simple. But for kids in the 1970s, Saturday morning cartoons were a kind of magic money could not buy. Board games missed. Nothing said fancy night like a foil tray full of mystery food. TV dinners were the ultimate poor kid luxury. You got a tray, compartments, and maybe even a tiny brownie in the corner. But heating them was a gamble. The mashed potatoes boiled over while the meatloaf stayed frozen in the center. You had to guess which corner to poke holes in or risk a microwave explosion. And once the edges of the tray started to curl, you knew it was done enough. No matter how uneven it cooked, you still ate every single bite, even the rubbery peas. That little brownie? Always undercooked, but somehow the best part. You followed the instructions, but still ended up with molten potatoes and frozen meat. You stabbed the plastic with a fork like it owed you money. And every corner of that tray had a different temperature zone. Sometimes the peas were ice cubes. Sometimes the meat turned into charcoal, but you ate it anyway, blowing on one bite and chipping your tooth on the next. There was always gravy. Always. It covered everything like a bad decision you could not take back. But the novelty? Unmatched. Sitting in front of the television with your own tray, pretending to be in a commercial, it was priceless. Even if it burned your tongue and your trust. Metal lunchboxes with a thermos were the badge of honor for elementary school survival. If you had one, it probably featured a cartoon character, a band, or a movie you barely knew but still loved. It was dented from being dropped, scratched from being dragged, but it was yours. Inside, there was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, maybe a bruised apple, and always that little plastic thermos with a twist-off lid. It smelled like old soup and chocolate milk, no matter how often you washed it. Sometimes the latch broke, sometimes the handle cracked, but you kept using it because buying a new one was not an option. You saw other kids with brand new bags, matching lunch gear, maybe even a juice box, You had your box with history, with stickers, with your name scratched on the inside in shaky pen. And it did the job. It kept your lunch safe, your drink sealed, and your spot at the lunch table secured. Because that box was more than metal. It was a daily piece of home. A little reminder of where you came from. And every clank it made walking to the cafeteria, that was the sound of you holding it all together. Wearing Toughskins jeans from Sears was like joining a secret club of kids who knew what it meant to make clothes last. They were stiff at first, real stiff, like cardboard stiff. But your parents swore they were indestructible. You'll grow out of them before they wear out, they'd say. And they were right. Toughskins were made for sliding, climbing, falling, and whatever else your day threw at them. They came in dark denim, sometimes weird colors, and always had that reinforced knee patch you could spot from a mile away. They never fit quite right. Too tight in the waist, too loose in the leg, but they held up. And in a house where you shared clothes or passed them down to younger siblings, that mattered. You knew they were from Sears. Everyone did. They were dependable, affordable, and everywhere. If you tore them, your mom patched them. If you stained them, you still wore them. They became a part of your childhood uniform. No frills, just function. And years later, when someone mentions Toughskins, you smile. Because even though they were kind of ugly, kind of uncomfortable, they were yours. And they got you through. Where in the 1970s, sleek, reliable, affordable. The kind of car your neighbor drove, your cousin saved up for, and your dad secretly liked better than his American sedan. It was Japan's Trojan horse into the United States market, and it worked brilliantly. But success brought identity problems. Nissan, its parent company, wanted global consistency. They did not want to be Datsun in one country and Nissan in another. So in the early 1980s, the decision was made: rebrand. Slowly, Datsun vanished. The name was pulled from brochures, badges, and showrooms. And just like that, a brand that millions had trusted was gone. People were confused. Dealerships had to explain that Nissan and Datsun were the same. Some buyers walked away. The transition was rocky, and for a while, Nissan lost ground in the market it had fought so hard to win. Looking back, the choice makes sense. But it still feels like something was stolen. A name, a memory, a piece of the road. Parker's Matchbox cars, especially the off-brand kind, were tiny engines of freedom. They were handed down, traded at school, found in junk drawers and old shoeboxes. Some rolled smooth, some had bent axles and missing wheels, but every one of them got raced across kitchen floors, dirt driveways, and the arms of worn-out couches. You made engine sounds with your mouth. Built ramps from cardboard. Pretended one was a race car, the next was a getaway vehicle. The cheap ones chipped paint fast and sometimes lost their tires on day one, but you kept them. You lined them up by color or speed, gave them names, and swore this one right here was the fastest in the world. They raced across dinner tables, battled in gravel, and launched from windowsills with the sound of childhood. Even if they were scratched and dented, they were worth everything to you. Because it was not about the brand, it was about the play. Those little cars went places, even when you could not. Not all stuffed animals came from toy stores. Poor kids often got theirs from the grocery store, sitting on shelves near the candy or seasonal displays. They were small, stiff, and cheaply made, but in a child's hands, they became best friends. The fur was rough, sometimes scratchy, and the eyes were hard plastic buttons that stared blankly. Seams tore easily, and stuffing peeked out after a few hugs. Still, kids clutched them tight at night, whispering secrets into ears that never answered. These stuffed animals were prizes in cereal box promotions, giveaways at gas stations, or impulse buys at checkout counters. They lacked the polish of big-name plushies, but they carried the same warmth and comfort. Looking back, their quality might have been low, but their emotional value was high. They were loved until they fell apart. And even then, many stayed tucked in closets as keepsakes. Do you remember hugging a stiff little grocery store bear as if it were the softest toy in the world? Chalk drawings on driveways were the art shows of the neighborhood, and all you needed was a handful of colored sticks from the dime store. Kids drew hopscotch grids, doodled flowers and houses, or sketched giant racetracks for toy cars to zoom across. Chalk dust covered your hands, knees, and sometimes even your face, but it washed away easily with the next rainstorm. The impermanence of it made each drawing special, like you were creating something meant only for that day. Friends competed over who could make the biggest hopscotch path or the silliest cartoon character, cheering and laughing as the creations grew across the pavement. Sometimes, you were proud enough to call your parents outside to admire your masterpiece, and they always smiled, even if they were really just admiring the joy on your face. For poor families, chalk was one of the cheapest investments you could make, yet it gave hours of fun and expression. It turned gray concrete into a canvas, letting kids imagine they were artists without needing galleries or supplies. What broke in the 1980s, plastic sandwich bags were not disposable. They were forever. You did not just use one and toss it. Oh no, that sandwich bag got a second life, a third, maybe even a fifth, depending on how careful you were with the peanut butter. Moms would rinse them out in the sink, drape them over the faucet or the dish rack, and let them air dry like little ghost gloves waiting for a haunting. You would see them lined up by the window, flapping slightly in the breeze, all turned inside out with the corners still crusty from yesterday's tuna sandwich. Some were foggy from wear. Others had names written in Sharpie that faded after each wash until they became anonymous warriors of lunchtime survival. If the bag had a tiny hole, a little tape would do the trick. If the zipper no longer zipped, you folded it over and hoped gravity did the rest. It was not about saving the planet. It was about saving a few dollars you simply did not have. You might have had a whole drawer full of used but still good sandwich bags right next to the repurposed margarine containers and Cool Whip tubs. They held sandwiches, crackers, trail mix, loose screws, broken crayons, whatever fit. And the worst thing you could do was throw one away without checking with mom first. That was basically a federal offense in the house. Today, people buy fancy silicone food pouches and brag about being eco-conscious. Back then, you did the same thing with a little dish soap, some patience, and a prayer that your jelly sandwich would not leak. It was not glamorous, but it worked. And honestly, when you unzipped that crinkly bag in the school cafeteria, you knew you were keeping a tradition alive, one crusty corner at a time. If you knew, you knew. Bologna was not just lunch meat, it was a culinary. Playing outside until the streetlights came on was not just routine, it was the rule. That was the signal. When those orange lights flickered on, it was time to go home. You roamed the block with a pack of neighborhood kids, you rode bikes, climbed fences, and played tag in someone else's yard. No cell phones, no supervision, just scraped knees, loud laughter, and the occasional yelling mom from a porch. It was freedom, and it was free. Sticks became swords. Chalk became currency. A pile of dirt was a construction site. You just needed time. You learned how to solve problems, how to get along, and how to stay out just long enough to avoid trouble. That was childhood in the 1980s. Messy, loud, full of moments no one ever filmed, but everyone remembers. Because out there, in the quiet chaos of your own little street, you felt like the richest kid in the world. TV brand frozen dinners were cheap, filling, and about as close as poor families got to restaurant food in the 1970s. The compartments kept everything separate. The meat, the mashed potatoes, the tiny dessert, Salisbury steak, fried chicken, turkey, and stuffing. The meals all sort of tasted the same, but they looked like more than they were. They made you feel like you were eating something fancy, even if it came in a tin tray. You had your own meal, your own dessert, your own little moment. It was dinner and dignity baked into one. Kids felt grown up eating them. Parents liked the price. You could buy a stack of them and have dinner for the week. They were hot, required no prep, and made it easy to say yes when everyone was too tired to cook. They were not about health, they were about convenience. You slid them out of the oven, ate them in front of the television, and called it a night. It was a little luxury for families who rarely got one, and for a few quiet minutes it felt like more than just a frozen tray. It felt like a break. RC Cola was the third-string soda, the one you reached for when Coca-Cola and Pepsi were just out of reach. But in the 1970s, if you were poor, RC Cola was more than enough. It came in tall glass bottles or big cans with bold blue and red branding, and it fizzed just fine. The taste was sweet, a little off, but still satisfying. You drank it at birthday parties, poured it over crushed ice on hot afternoons, and shared it at family dinners when you could not swing the name brand stuff. RC was cheaper, easier to find in bulk, and often sold by the case in discount grocery stores. Some parents swore they liked it better. Most kids could not tell the difference. And in houses where every penny mattered, nobody was complaining. It was soda that did not make you feel broke. It was celebration in a can, even if the label said otherwise. It let families feel like they had what everyone else had, just without the big-name price. It was a treat, a soda night reward, a way to feel like you had something extra even when the fridge was bare. RC Cola was not about prestige. It was about possibility, and it earned its spot in every low-budget grocery haul with fizz, sweetness, and just enough kick to get you through. Busboy at a local restaurant was how you learned to keep your head down and your hands moving. You were not the waiter. You were not the cook. You were the one who cleared plates, wiped tables, and swept crumbs before the next family sat down. You moved fast, silently, always watching for the next spill or dirty fork. You had to learn to dodge kids underfoot, servers shouting orders, and trays that came flying through swinging kitchen doors. And by the time you took your 5-minute break, if you got one, you had already cleaned up after 3 dinner rushes and a dropped milkshake. You carried heavy tubs of dishes to the back, dumped scraps into the trash, and stacked silverware like it was made of gold. Some customers said thank you, most did not. You worked double shifts on weekends. You took the closing shift on weeknights. And at the end of every night, your shoes were soaked and your back was sore. But you stayed, because tips got split, because managers noticed hustle, because busboy today might mean server next year and manager after that. You were not invisible, you were just starting. TV dinners turned the living room into a dining room, one foil tray at a time. They were not new in the 1960s, but this was the decade they really took off, just as television became the centerpiece of American family life. You got a little compartment for meatloaf, one for mashed potatoes, another for corn, maybe a brownie tucked into the corner. All you had to do was pop it in the oven, wait, and serve. No planning, no cleanup, no arguing over what to cook. The tray itself felt futuristic. Everything had its place. The food was not gourmet, but it was warm, salty, and comforting in its predictability. Families could eat while watching their favorite shows. Kids could feel like grown-ups with their own personal meal. The appeal was clear, fast, easy, and made to match the rhythm of modern life. TV dinners were more than just food. They were a new way to eat, one that said it was okay to sit on the couch and focus on The Ed Sullivan Show or Bonanza. The clang of a fork against aluminum still echoes in memory. For many, it was the sound of dinner and television becoming one. Every kid wanted a collection of Hot Wheels, but if you were poor, you probably had knockoffs. They looked fine at first glance, bright paint jobs, shiny wheels, but a closer look showed crooked axles and bent frames. These cars barely rolled, scraping across the kitchen floor instead of zooming. The wheels popped off after a few races, and the doors never opened like the real thing. Still, kids lined them up in neat rows, giving each car names and stories. They raced them down homemade ramps, even if they wobbled and crashed halfway down. Parents bought them in bulk at dollar stores, sold in plastic packs with names like Speed Racer Set or Supercar Collection. They were cheaper than Hot Wheels, and that was enough to make them treasures for kids who did not know any different. Looking back, the quality was laughable, but the memories remain priceless. Knockoff cars became fire trucks, taxis, or racing champions, all powered by imagination. Do you remember flicking a crooked-wheeled car across the floor, cheering as if it won the race? Backyard camping with old blankets was the closest many kids came to an actual vacation. Families who could not afford a trip to the mountains or a campsite simply made do with what they had. You dragged out old blankets, draped them over chairs or a clothesline, and called it a tent. Flashlights became lanterns, and jars with holes in the lid became prisons for lightning bugs. You roasted marshmallows if you could afford them, or just pretended by holding sticks over a candle. The crickets chirped, the night air grew cool, and the stars overhead seemed brighter when you were lying flat on the ground. Sometimes the tent collapsed halfway through the night, sometimes the damp grass soaked through, but no one cared. It was all part of the adventure. Parents watched from the porch, amused by the drama of kids swearing they would spend the whole night outside only to sneak back inside before midnight. Backyard camping cost nothing, but it gave kids the same excitement as any trip far away. For families stretched thin in the 1970s, those nights under the stars proved that wonder did not require money, just imagination. No toys? No problem. Just give a poor kid some cardboard tubes, a roll of tape, and maybe some crayons, and watch the imagination take off. One minute it was a telescope, the next it was a lightsaber. With enough glue, it became an action figure, a spaceship, or a castle tower. If you were lucky, you had construction paper. If not, you just peeled labels off cans and used that. Every cardboard tube became a character, a weapon, or a part of something bigger. You made puppets with googly eyes drawn in marker, or you taped two together and made binoculars. Fully functional, if your definition of functional was extremely flexible. Friends brought over their store-bought toys. You brought out your homemade tank, made from paper towel rolls and bottle caps. And honestly, yours were cooler. They were yours. Original. One of a kind. You learned early that imagination could build anything, and budget had nothing to do with it. Like having a stubborn, slow-moving roommate, you had to be patient. Dialing took effort, especially if there were a lot of 8s and 9s in the number. You would stick your finger in, turn the wheel, and wait for it to spin all the way back. If you messed up, you had to start over. The cord was always too short or too long and tangled, and it somehow wrapped itself around everything. You might have had to stand in the kitchen to talk, stretching the phone into the hallway so no one else could hear you. And if someone picked up the other line in the house, forget it. Instant embarrassment. But even with all that hassle, that phone was your lifeline. It was how your mom called relatives, how you ordered pizza when it was a special night, how you waited nervously for your friend to call after school. There was no caller ID, no texting, just a ring, and whoever answered was who you got. Conversations had weight, had pauses, you listened, you talked, you passed the phone back and forth like a precious object, and when you hung up, it was with a solid click that said the moment was done. You cannot replicate that now. You really cannot. They looked like Oreos, kind of. But anyone who grew up poor in the 1970s knows they did not taste the same. Hydrox cookies were the generic version of a name-brand dream. The chocolate wafers were crisp, but just a little off. The filling was there, but not as creamy, not as sweet. And yet, for a lot of families, it was the only cookie that ever made it into the cart. Hydrox was what you bought when you wanted a treat but needed to stretch the grocery budget. You dipped them in milk, packed them in lunches, handed them out when friends came over. Some kids loved them. Some kids just ate them because there was nothing else. They did not come with ads. They did not come with prizes. They came in a quiet package that promised value, not flair. But they were always enough to stop a sugar craving in its tracks. You could find them in the pantry next to the store-brand cereal, wrapped in cellophane that crinkled the same way every time. Parents kept them on hand for dessert, for snacks, for those nights when there was no real dessert but you needed something sweet anyway. Hydrox were not the cookies you bragged about, but they were the ones you had. And for a lot of kids growing up without much, they became the flavor of Friday nights, after-school snacks, and the quiet reward for making it through another day. They were not Oreos. They were something else, something real. Construction laborer was a job you felt in your bones by the end of the day. You carried bricks, hoisted lumber, dug trenches, mixed concrete, or cleaned up after the skilled guys packed up. You were not a carpenter, not yet. You were muscle. And in the 1970s, there was always something that needed building or tearing down. You woke up early, ate fast, got to the site before the sun burned through the fog, steel-toe boots, calloused hands, a hard hat that never quite fit right. You learned how to take orders fast and keep your mouth shut around foremen who did not tolerate backtalk. You watched your paycheck go straight to rent, groceries, and keeping the car from breaking down. Again. You hoped every week that the work would last, that the contract would not dry up, that someone would remember your name when the next project started. And when payday finally came, you picked up your envelope with dirty hands and a quiet kind of pride. You got paid in sweat and, if you were lucky, some overtime. Rain made the job slippery, sun made it brutal, cold made your fingers stiff around the shovel. But the crew stuck together. You watched each other's backs, shared water, shared jokes. Sometimes you learned to trade along the way. Sometimes you just learned how to lift with your legs. The work was loud, dusty, and dangerous. But you got to point at something, years later, and say, "I helped build that." That mattered. That meant something. Cafeteria work. Stick in a dirt pile sounds like a joke, but it was real. You found a patch of dry earth, grabbed a decent stick, and suddenly you were building roads, castles, or digging to the other side of the world. The dirt was your canvas. The stick was your tool. No batteries, no rules, no cleanup instructions. You made ditches for your toy cars, dug trenches for army men, buried treasure, drew racetracks, built ant cities. It left your fingernails black and your knees brown, but you did not care. That little patch of dirt became your kingdom, and that stick was all you needed to rule it. It was your sword, your shovel, your blueprint, and your best tool. You used it to write in the mud, carve messages, or make maps that only you could read. You could draw whole cities, then destroy them with one swoop. You fought imaginary battles, raced imaginary cars, and gave yourself a promotion to foreman just because you could. And when you snapped it in two, you grabbed another stick and kept building like nothing happened. You got blisters, splinters, maybe even a few scoldings, but you kept going. Because nothing beat the feeling of carving out something from nothing. Poor kids turned backyards and alleyways into construction zones, battlefields, and stadiums, no budget required. You could play for hours, sun up to sun down. And when you were finally called inside, you left your stick leaning against the wall, ready for tomorrow's work. Talent shows in the living room turned Saturday nights into performances fit for a theater, even if the stage was just a sheet draped across the couch. Brothers and sisters sang, danced, or told corny jokes, and the audience was usually mom, dad, and whoever happened to be visiting. Costumes came out of closets, wigs were made of towels, and microphones were nothing more than a wooden spoon. Some kids took it seriously, practicing for hours, while others just enjoyed being silly, making everyone laugh until they cried. Parents clapped no matter how off-key the singing or how awkward the dance steps, because it was never about perfection. Sometimes there were prizes, maybe a cookie for the winner, or the honor of not doing dishes that night. These shows turned an ordinary living room into a place where creativity, pride, and family warmth shone brightest. Poor families could not buy tickets to concerts or Broadway, but they made their own entertainment, and it was often better than anything money could buy. You did not need a toy chest when you had a couch. Just rip the cushions off, throw a blanket over the top, and boom, you were in a castle, spaceship, or post-apocalyptic bunker. Couch forts were indoor magic, created out of boredom and budget. Some forts even had rooms, one for snacks, one for sleeping, and one that was always just someone hiding with a flashlight. The more pillows you stole from around the house, the stronger the walls. Someone always crawled in and kicked the roof down, and someone always cried, but it got rebuilt, stronger every time. You decorated with couch throws and whatever stuffed animals were lying around. If you had a working flashlight and a peanut butter sandwich, it might as well have been a mansion. The cushions smelled like feet and popcorn. You used old towels for a roof and held them down with soup cans. And heaven help you if your dad came home and wanted to sit down. Your fort had no rules. The floor was lava. The doorway was a blanket flap. You brought snacks inside and called it a kitchen. You hid there during arguments. You camped there during cartoons. That little cave of fabric and stuffing was your escape. You had no Legos, no Nintendo, no dollhouse, but you had imagination. And a lumpy couch from the 1970s. And honestly, what else did you need? Our no-brand pantry staples were a whole experience on their own. White labels, black letters, no frills, just the word beans or corn staring back at you. If you shopped with your parents in the 1980s, you remember the generic aisle like it was a secret world. It was where families on tight budgets made real decisions. You did not care if the cereal came in a bag instead of a box. It still crunched. It still filled you up. Rice, flour, sugar, all stacked in basic packaging with no cartoon mascots or flashy colors. Instead of getting 2 brand name items, you could get 5 generics. Sure, maybe your cereal turned soggy faster, or your mac and cheese had a weird texture, but it kept you full. And it let you feel normal. Yours just had it from the white box with the black label. And that was okay. You learned that food is food, and that taste matters a lot less when hunger is on the table. It came in a tiny cardboard box with 2 foil packets inside, and somehow it stretched into enough food to feed the whole family. Lipton's soup mix was not just soup. It was casserole flavoring, dip base, meatloaf binder, and magic dust in poor homes during the 1970s. The onion flavor was the workhorse. You mixed it into sour cream to make a dip, stirred it into hamburger for extra taste, poured it into boiling water, and hoped the noodles made it hearty enough for a main dish. It was the secret to making bland food taste like something. It hid the flavor of old meat. It made cheap rice feel like dinner. It turned 2 ingredients into 5. It kept you from feeling like you were just eating to survive. It was cheap, versatile, and dependable. You did not buy it to impress anyone. You bought it because you needed dinner on the table fast and had about 2 ingredients to work with. Lipton soup mix helped meals feel like meals. It was not glamorous, but it gave flavor, made leftovers better, and helped plain ingredients feel complete. It was a pantry staple with no frills, just solutions. And when you were counting every cent, that was exactly what you needed. The bag was thin, the slices were soft and stuck together, and if you bought Kroger brand white bread in the 1970s, it was because it was the cheapest loaf on the shelf. No seeds, no whole grain, no attitude, just plain white bread that got the job done. You made peanut butter sandwiches with it, bologna, grilled cheese, French toast if you had eggs, bread pudding if it went stale. You toasted it, you buttered it, you packed it in lunchboxes 5 days a week. It was the loaf that never judged. It made the lunch table feel normal when the rest of your life didn't. It folded up for sandwiches without plates. It tasted like home even when there was nothing in the fridge. It was plain, but it held your whole day together. It tore easy, got soggy quick. But it was cheap and filled bellies. You could get 2 loaves for the price of 1 name brand, and in homes where pennies mattered, that meant everything. It was not something you savored. It was something you leaned on, something that showed up at every meal, held everything together, and asked for nothing in return. Kroger bread was not about flavor. It was about function. And sometimes cowboys and horses came in bags the size of your forearm, sold at dime stores for next to nothing. You dumped them out and sorted them by pose, gun drawn, rifle ready, lasso mid-throw. The horses never stood straight. The cowboys never quite fit in the saddles, but you forced them anyway. You built towns out of cardboard and corral fences out of popsicle sticks. The cowboys had names, rivalries, showdowns. You made horse gallop sounds with your mouth, rolled the cowboys down hills, and set up ambushes in the sandbox. Sometimes the paint wore off in a day. Sometimes the horse's legs bent until it looked more like a giraffe. But you kept them, played hard, then shoved them into a shoebox until the next round. They had hats molded to their heads and faces without features, but you saw everything in them. They were freedom, adventure, and a whole world west of your backyard. It did not take much. A patch of grass and a little time, and you were riding into the sunset. For many poor kids, dinosaurs came in clear plastic bags from discount stores. They had no names, no instructions, just a handful of mismatched reptiles in neon colors. A bright purple T-Rex fought a green Stegosaurus while a blue Brontosaurus watched nearby. The details were rough, Teeth that looked like blobs, tails bent at odd angles, and bodies that did not match any dinosaur in a textbook. Still, kids loved them, staging prehistoric battles in sandboxes or on kitchen tables. Each dinosaur had a role, whether hero or villain, and imagination filled in the missing science. Parents bought them because they were cheap, a quick reward at the grocery store checkout line. Dinosaurs piled up in toy boxes, always ready for another round of battles. They were not Jurassic Park quality, but they fueled just as much excitement. Looking back, the plastic was thin and the paint chipped easily, but those bagged dinosaurs were icons of childhood. Do you remember holding a neon dinosaur, certain it was the fiercest creature in your collection? Homemade slip and slides in the backyard were the kind of genius invention only kids could dream up in the 1970s. Forget about the expensive plastic versions sold in stores. You had old black trash bags, a garden hose, and a little bit of dish soap. You spread the bags out across the patchy grass, weighed down the corners with rocks, and sprayed the whole thing until it gleamed with water and suds. The first kid to take a running dive down that slick surface either slid gracefully or wound up with a grass burn, but either way, everyone cheered. Parents shook their heads, warning about broken bones, but as long as nobody cried too loudly, the fun kept going. Sometimes the soap made the slide extra foamy, and you would come up at the end covered head to toe in bubbles, looking like you had just been through a car wash. If you were lucky, your neighbors joined in, and suddenly half the block was waiting in line to take a turn. The trash bags ripped constantly, and you had to patch them together or add more, but no one cared. It was not about perfection. It was about cooling down in the heat, laughing until your belly ached, and proving that you did not need money for joy. On the hottest summer weekends, those makeshift water parks felt like heaven. Looking back, it was reckless, messy, and just about perfect. You reused. And the king of all containers? Cool Whip tubs. That white plastic bowl with the blue lid held leftovers, soup, rice, buttons, or maybe just mystery food from 3 weeks ago. You opened the fridge and saw a dozen Cool Whip labels, but only one actually had whipped topping inside. Every time someone brought food to a party, there was a 50% chance it came in a Cool Whip tub. You labeled the lids with a marker that immediately rubbed off, and you could never find the right lid when you needed it. Some families got fancy and used Country Crock margarine tubs. Either way, they were stackable, practically indestructible, and had zero microwave safety. You knew not to put it in the microwave unless you wanted melted plastic stew. But it worked. And if you lost one, who cared? It was disposable, but not really. Moms had drawers full of them like prized heirlooms, and you never threw one out unless you wanted a lecture. Back then, reusing containers was not trendy. It was survival. That scarf your grandma made? It was love in yarn form, but also, it was all you had. Sweaters with sleeves that sagged, hats that itched, gloves without mates. You wore them anyway. They were handmade, which meant they were priceless, but also impossible to trade for something trendier. While your classmates had brand-name jackets with neon logos, you had a cardigan the color of mustard and maroon. It stood out. It always stood out. You told people it was vintage. You hoped they believed you. You wrapped yourself in the stitches of someone's time, someone's care, someone's refusal to let you be cold. It wasn't fashionable, but it was love you could wear. But you knew. Hand-knitted clothes told a different story. One of care, one of necessity. Someone spent hours making that sweater because they could not afford to buy you one. It was frugal. It was functional. It was one of the few things that kept you warm when money could not. And yes, sometimes it was embarrassing, but other times it reminded you that love could be worn and passed down. Plastic slinkies that never made it down the stairs were every kid's heartbreak, and hope rolled into a coil. They looked amazing in the store, rainbow-colored, stretchy, hypnotic. You saw the commercials. You knew what they were supposed to do, bounce from stair to stair like magic. But if you bought the cheap version, or more likely got it from a dollar store, you learned real quick that it did not work like that. The first time you dropped it from the top of the stairs, it took one lopsided hop and collapsed like a tired worm. You picked it up, tried again. You adjusted each coil like it was brain surgery. You even tried flipping it over or walking it with your hands, hoping to unlock the secret motion. But it always twisted, bent, or tangled. And when a slinky tangled, it was game over. Still, you kept it. You stretched it across the room, hung it from your doorknob, wore it like a bracelet. It squeaked, snapped, and sometimes pinched. But it was yours. A plastic slinky might not have delivered on its promise, but it gave you something else. Patience, creativity, and the stubborn belief that maybe next time it would work. Sunday afternoon drives just to look were the kind of simple tradition families cherished in the 1970s. Dad would fill the tank with just a few bucks, barely enough to cover a couple gallons, and pile everyone into the car. The ride itself was the adventure. Windows rolled down, the breeze whipping your hair, the radio playing whatever station the antenna could catch, and no one really caring about where they ended up. Families drove past new neighborhoods, pointing at houses they dreamed of one day owning. They cruised by farmland, admiring rows of crops or herds of cows grazing lazily. Sometimes the drive was about showing the kids where mom or dad had grown up, circling past old schools or favorite hangouts. Other times it was just to break the monotony of sitting at home on a tight budget. Kids argued in the back seat, someone always asking if they were there yet, even though there was never really a destination. The gas gauge dipped low, but Dad stretched every mile, knowing the drive itself was the treat. For families without money for vacations or outings, these drives were a way to escape, to dream, and to spend time together without spending much at all.
Turn left. Oh, not included.
Here's what you can make in an easy bake mini.
Do you ever think about those funny things from the 80s? So specific and strange, only the broke kids really knew them? For families just trying to get by, these moments weren't quirky. They were everyday life, built from stretch meals, hand-me-downs, and pure invention. But looking back now, why does it all feel kind of priceless? Before smart TVs, before remotes with 50 buttons, before remotes at all, there was you. If you were a kid in the 1980s without money for gadgets, your job was simple. Stand by the television and be ready to switch the channel the moment someone yelled. Your parents sat comfortably on the couch, and you stood next to a giant floor model TV, rotating the stiff dial like you were cracking a safe. Go to channel 3. Click, click. No, channel 5. Click, click, click. Wait, back to 2. You were not watching TV. You were running it. Sometimes you stood there for 10 minutes holding the antenna just right so the static would go away. If you sat down too soon, they would yell your name like you had broken the law. This was cardio disguised as family bonding. You memorized where the good channels were, when to stop right before the news, and how not to block the screen. Bonus points if the knob was already busted and you had to use pliers. Back then, being remote controlled meant you were doing the controlling, and if you complained, the answer was always the same. When you pay the electric bill, then you can sit down. Snow boots? Luxury. Bag or free school lunches were not just meals. They were mini lifelines in the middle of the school day. Your lunch was either packed at home with whatever you had, or handed to you from the cafeteria on a tray that came with a quiet kind of understanding. If you were lucky, you got a peanut butter sandwich, maybe an apple, and a little carton of milk. If you got free lunch, it might have been spaghetti in a plastic tray, or a slice of rectangular pizza that somehow always tasted amazing. Either way, it kept you going. And for kids growing up poor in the 1980s, school lunch was sometimes the only real meal of the day. Your mom made that paper bag stretch, a sandwich made with the heel of the loaf, some off-brand chips, maybe a reused butter container with pudding in it, if you had that kind of luck. There was no fancy thermos, just whatever worked. And even if the food was cold, you were warm for a moment, sitting with friends who might not know you were skipping dinner again that night. The worst part? The judgment. Kids who had brand-name snacks, packed lunches with neatly cut fruit, they noticed. But you noticed too. That lunch was a badge of survival. A midday reminder that someone was trying to take care of you. And it mattered. A lot more than people realized. Wearing plastic. The lid was red. And the label had a happy, kid-friendly vibe that made it feel like a treat. But Peter Pan peanut butter was also one of the most affordable brands on the shelf in the 1970s, and that is why it ended up in so many low-income homes. It was creamy, sweet, and spread easily, even when the bread was stale or the knife was dull. You made sandwiches with it. You ate it off a spoon. You dipped apples if you had them, crackers if you did not. It worked for breakfast, lunch, snacks, and sometimes even dinner. A spoonful of peanut butter could quiet hunger, give you a little energy, and stretch a day until bedtime. It lasted longer than most groceries and kept longer too. Peter Pan was not fancy, but it was dependable. It showed up in school lunches, in food pantry bags, in packed suitcases for road trips. It was the peanut butter of survival and simple comfort. It did not need to be organic or gourmet. It just needed to be there. And it always was. They came in a paper-thin box and cost less than $1. Jump ropes made from clothesline were the definition of make-do. You could not always afford the brightly colored ropes with the plastic handles from the store, but if you had a long enough piece of clothesline and 2 willing hands, you had a toy. You tied knots at the ends, maybe added tape to make a grip. Sometimes it was just string, rough, thin, and quick to burn your palm if it slipped. But you jumped anyway. On the sidewalk, in the driveway, alone or with friends turning both ends. It slapped the pavement in rhythm like a drum beat, marking time between laughs. You made up new rhymes, some silly, some secret. You dared each other to go faster, higher, longer without tripping. And even when your feet tangled and you fell, you got back up and asked for another turn. That rope was your challenge and your champion. Proof that you did not need anything fancy to feel free. You said the rhymes, missed the beat, laughed so hard your ribs hurt. The rope would leave little red marks on your ankles and arms, and you wore them like medals. If it frayed or snapped, you tied it back together and kept jumping. It was not about the rope. It was about what you did with it. Because poor kids learned early that fun was not about the price tag. It was about the rhythm. Jumping rope was freedom. It was movement. It was breath and grit and laughter, all wrapped up in one swinging line. Glass bottles for refunds was one of the cleverest ways kids in poor families turned free time into pocket money. The system was simple enough. Soda bottles, milk bottles, even beer bottles could be returned for a small deposit, usually a nickel each. That may not sound like much now, but back then, it was enough to buy candy, a soda, or even start saving for something bigger. So, on weekends, kids grabbed old sacks or wagons and roamed the streets, scanning ditches, empty lots, and trash bins for the glint of glass. Some made it into a competition. Whoever collected the most bottles earned bragging rights for the week. Of course, there were always a few scrapes and cuts from handling broken glass, but nobody thought twice about it. Returning the bottles meant standing at the counter of the corner store, trading in your collection for a handful of coins that felt like treasure. Sometimes you even spent it right there on penny candy, savoring the reward of your scavenger hunt. Parents encouraged it too, because it kept kids busy, taught responsibility, and put a little extra into the family budget without costing anything. In the 1970s, when money was tight, even a handful of nickels could brighten a kid's weekend. Access to cable television in the 1980s meant your world came through rabbit ears. You had the basics, network channels, maybe a grainy local station or two. But when friends talked about Nickelodeon, MTV, or the Disney Channel, you just smiled and nodded, pretending you knew what they meant. Your TV had an antenna wrapped in aluminum foil. Your Saturday mornings were for cartoons on the few channels that came in clear. You learned to adjust the rabbit ears just right, then sit perfectly still, because moving even an inch might send the screen back into static. You missed out on the cable exclusive shows, the big movie nights, the flashy channels with round-the-clock music videos. You got public access, reruns, and news that ended with the national anthem. At school, you heard about shows you never saw. You laughed along anyway, At home, you made the most of what you had. Limited channels meant fewer choices, but also fewer arguments. You watched whatever was on. You made it work. And you learned something strange. When there was only one option, it often became your favorite. The picture was not perfect, but it was yours. And sometimes, that was enough. Sleeping on pull-out sofas or sharing beds was just how it worked when you had more people than rooms. Privacy was a luxury. If there was a couch, it doubled as a bed. If there was a floor, it became a mattress. Pull-out sofas were these heavy, metal-framed beasts that unfolded with a creak and a thud. You would wrestle with the cushions, maybe pinch your fingers, and finally lay down on something that felt more like springs than comfort. But it beat sleeping in a chair. And sharing a bed? That was a sibling rite of passage. You argued about who got the wall side. You fought over blankets. You complained about feet touching. But in the end, you fell asleep to the sound of breathing beside you. It was closeness, forced by circumstance. And yeah, sometimes it was annoying, but it also meant you were not alone. There was a strange kind of safety in that, in knowing someone else was right there, even if they snored, even if they kicked. Those nights on the pullout or squeezed into one bed with two other kids taught you how to adapt, how to sleep through anything, how to find peace in a room filled with snoring, murmured dreams, and the hum of an old fan. You made space where there was none, because love and sleep and survival all happened in the same few square feet. A small blue box cost a handful of change and turned a quiet meal into something that felt like comfort. Jiffy Corn Muffin Mix was a pantry hero in poor households during the 1970s. Just add milk and an egg if you had one, and you had hot muffins in the oven in under 20 minutes. They were sweet, soft, and a little crumbly. You ate them with beans, stew, soup, or just plain with margarine. Some families made them stretch by adding canned corn. Others just served them as is and let the warmth do the talking. Jiffy was cheap, easy, and always there. A side dish that felt like something more. Like someone had tried. Like dinner meant more than just filling up. The box was small, but the impact was big. Jiffy helped turn a dollar store dinner into something that felt like home. It was soft enough to squish. There was something sacred about turning off the lights and flipping on a light Breit. Suddenly, your bedroom transformed into a tiny, glowing studio. With each colored peg you pressed into the black screen, magic happened. Reds, blues, greens, and yellows lit up like little fireworks trapped in plastic. Introduced in the late 1960s but beloved through the 1970s, Light Bright was not loud. It did not move or speak, but it taught kids something powerful: how to make beauty, one dot at a time. You started with a blank template or maybe a paper guide with letters, but over time, you stopped using instructions. You made your own stars, your own hearts, your own masterpieces. It was slow, patient, personal. The warmth of the bulb inside hummed beneath your fingers. You could feel the light, not just see it. Sometimes you messed up, pulled out the wrong peg. It did not matter. You just kept building, fixing, creating, and when you finally stepped back and saw your little glowing creation, it felt like pride. Not toy pride, real pride, because you did that. Light Bright made every child an artist, and in a world of noise and chaos, it offered a quiet glow of control, creativity, and calm. Before Super Soakers ruled the 1990s, poor kids in the 1980s had simple plastic water pistols. They were small, brightly colored, and leaky. A few pumps gave you a thin, crooked stream of water that barely reached your target. The pistols cracked easily, the triggers jammed, and the tanks held almost nothing. Still, they fueled backyard battles, soaking friends in between squeals of laughter. Kids reloaded at garden hoses or buckets, ready for round after round of watery fun. The water was often warm and tasted faintly like rubber, but that never stopped anyone. Some kids added food coloring to make special ammo, staining shirts and grass in the process. And the constant dripping from the barrel left wet trails down arms and shorts, a reminder of how cheap they really were. Parents bought them cheap at grocery stores, dollar shops, or gas stations. They broke after a week, but by then, Summer had moved on to the next distraction. Looking back, those leaky pistols were symbols of simple fun. Do you remember aiming a crooked stream of water, proud to have the best water gun on the block? Shopping at the mall was a weekend ritual for poor families who could not afford to buy much but still wanted to feel part of the excitement. You wandered past shiny displays, admiring clothes, shoes, and gadgets you only dreamed of owning. Kids pressed noses to the toy store window, making mental wish lists, while parents pretended not to notice the disappointment. Even though you knew most of it was out of reach, there was still a thrill in imagining what it might feel like to own it. The mall was not just a place to shop, it was a place to dream, a world of possibility wrapped in glass and neon lights. Sometimes you splurged on one treat, like a single soft pretzel or a shared ice cream cone, stretching the moment out so it lasted. Escalators became rides, fountains were meeting spots, and department stores offered free entertainment with their endless counters of samples and testers. It was not about shopping. It was about being together, imagining, and enjoying the bustle of the mall without spending more than $1. For poor families, it was an outing that cost almost nothing but still felt like an event. You never knew luxury until you begged for Fruit Loops and got fruit swirls in a plastic bag the size of your torso. It came from the bottom shelf at the grocery store and weighed more than your little brother. But it lasted forever, because no one really wanted to eat it. The flakes were stale, the marshmallows melted in milk, and it all tasted like corn syrup and crushed dreams. You would pour a bowl, drown it in sugar, and still somehow feel cheated. It looked familiar. It smelled close enough. But that first bite reminded you. You were not in Kellogg's country. You were in Toasty Circle's land. And yet it was always in the house, because it was $5 for enough cereal to last 3 months. And when money was tight, close enough was good enough. Can discount grocery store was the kind of place you never admitted shopping at, unless you were Dad. Then it was a badge of honor. You did not bring a list here. You brought instincts. Aisles of unlabeled tins, faded labels, and cardboard signs scribbled in permanent marker, 10 cans for $1. What cans? Who knew? Dad would hold one up and say, "Beef chunks and gravy." Sounds promising, like he was about to enter it in a cooking competition. Most of the time it was mystery meat roulette, but we were not there for the menu. We were there for the thrill. He treated the whole store like an auction. "Name brand beans. Get them while they last," he would whisper, like a man uncovering buried treasure. At checkout, he would proudly announce how much he saved. Never mind the fact that dinner might be spaghetti and something we would call tomato adjacent. You learned to laugh, to try everything once, and to realize a meal made on the cheap still meant you had one. But for a different kind of treasure, tucked away in someone's garage, let me tell you about the model train shop that made time stand still. Clothes together as a family was a quiet but important part of life when money was tight. Moms hauled out the sewing machine, while kids sorted scraps of fabric or threaded needles. Holes in jeans were patched with mismatched squares, shirts were restitched, and sometimes hand-me-downs were altered to fit younger siblings. What might have looked shabby to outsiders was seen at home as a badge of care, proof that nothing and no one was disposable. The sound of scissors snipping and fabric being pulled taught kids the rhythm of thrift, the heartbeat of survival. The work could take hours, but it was filled with chatter, laughter, and the hum of the machine. Some kids learned to sew simple stitches themselves, taking pride in helping keep the family wardrobe alive. While wealthier families bought new clothes each season, poor families made every shirt and pair of pants last as long as possible. These patched garments were more than clothes. They were symbols of resourcefulness, care, and family effort. Looking back, those evenings spent mending were about more than fabric. They were about love stitched into every seam. Dying when the stuffing peeked out. But instead of replacing it, your family reached for duct tape. Gray, silver, black, sometimes even the brown kind if you were fancy. The tape did not match, it did not blend, but it held. You patched the corners, the armrests, the mysterious hole in the middle that nobody admitted to making. Eventually, the couch looked like a science fair project covered in strips and stickers. It stuck to your clothes. It peeled off in summer. And if you shifted too fast, it made a ripping sound that gave everyone a heart attack. Still, you kept sitting. Because the couch was fine. It still worked. Mostly. Sometimes you added a blanket over it, like that would distract from the layers of tape underneath. It did not, but it made you feel like you tried. The couch might sag, it might creak, but it was home. And duct tape? That was just another family tradition. Jeans were never new. They were patched, over and over again. The knees always went first, so your mom... Neighborhood swap meets and flea markets were poor kid Disneyland. You did not need a ticket, just a couple of coins and a good eye. Folding tables lined a church lot or a dusty field. Old clothes, rusty tools, toys missing pieces, books with worn covers. It was all there and all up for grabs. You could trade, you could haggle. And sometimes you found something amazing. A working Walkman, a vintage comic, maybe a half-used bottle of perfume that still smelled like heaven. These were not just junk sales. They were treasure hunts. Your parents went looking for shoes, winter coats, kitchenware. You went looking for something shiny, something yours. And no one judged what you bought, because everyone was there for the same reason, to stretch $1 into something meaningful. The sellers were regular folks, sometimes neighbors, clearing out their basements and trunks for a few bucks. And every now and then, they would throw something in for free. "Go on, take it," they'd say with a wink. And you would smile like you just won the lottery. That feeling, that thrill of finding something good for almost nothing, stuck with you. Even now, it is hard to walk past a flea market without slowing down, because that memory of making a little money. Buy name-brand cola unless there was a coupon or a sale. You bought Shasta. It came in tall silver cans with loud colors and louder flavors: cola, root beer, orange, grape, and it cost less than half of the big brands. For poor families in the 1970s, Shasta was the party drink, the movie night treat, the after-dinner splash of sweetness. It fizzed like the real thing, even if the taste was a little off. Kids did not care. Adults shrugged and drank it anyway. Shasta made you feel like you had something extra, like you could afford a little fun without breaking the budget. You brought it to potlucks, poured it into Dixie cups, packed it into coolers for summer barbecues. The cans always seemed colder. The flavors always seemed brighter. Maybe it was just because you appreciated it more when money was tight. Shasta was not a luxury. It was a substitute. But it was a good one. And it meant you did not have to say no when someone asked for a soda. It came in homemade paper dolls were fragile, flat little friends you built yourself. All it took was a sheet of notebook paper, some crayons, and a pair of scissors your mom did not want you using. You sketched a figure, maybe two. Then you drew outfits, lots of them, with little paper tabs that folded over their shoulders and hips. They never quite fit right, but they worked if you were careful. Sometimes you copied real people. Sometimes you invented princesses, astronauts, or disco stars. They had lives, names, and wardrobes made entirely of thin, wrinkled pages. You carried them in envelopes, stacked their clothes in old lunch bags, and treated every new outfit like it was high fashion. If one tore, you taped it and said it was an injury. If it got wet, you made a new one and called it a twin. And when you played with someone else's dolls, you always promised to give them back, but secretly wished you could keep one. You made weddings, parties, and imaginary dramas play out on the floor with paper and tape. And somehow, those crayon lines and folded flaps held more excitement than anything on a screen ever could. They were delicate, they were handmade, and they proved that with a little creativity, a child could create a whole world out of plastic army men were a staple of childhood, especially for poor families in the 1980s. The dollar store bags held dozens of them, tiny green or tan soldiers frozen in poses. They stood on little plastic bases, rifles raised, binoculars in hand, ready for war on the living room carpet. But these cheap versions broke easily. A rifle snapped off with the first bend, or a base cracked in half after a few battles. Feet warped from the plastic mold, making soldiers wobble or fall flat. Still, Kids staged epic wars, filling tabletops, sandboxes, or backyard dirt patches with armies of fragile fighters. The fun was not in perfection, but in the battles themselves. Soldiers melted in the sun, buried in the garden, or blown up with firecrackers when kids wanted realism. Poor quality only added to the chaos, and nobody cared that the soldiers rarely survived long campaigns. Today, Army men are remembered with fondness, even if they were disposable by design. Do you remember crouching in the dirt, lining up a flimsy soldier, and declaring victory in a war fought entirely in your imagination? Town like a memory you could not shake. You always heard them. Always. It did not matter if you were inside or outside, awake or half asleep. They cut through the noise, soft, low, peaceful, like someone reminding you, it's Sunday, time to gather. It was not just a call to worship, it was a call to stillness. The bells made you stop whatever you were doing, even if just for a second. Bikes slowed, conversations paused. Grown-ups looked toward the sound without even realizing it. Some people crossed themselves, some bowed their heads, others just nodded and kept walking, like they had heard from an old friend. You did not need to go to church to feel the moment. The sound itself carried something sacred. It was not just a call to worship. It was a call to stillness, to reflection, to putting on your best and showing up. Not everyone went to church, but everyone heard those bells. They drifted through kitchen windows, past front porches, across quiet streets. You could almost set your clock to them. And in a world before push notifications, those bells told you what really mattered. They were tradition, community, and reverence, all wrapped in a single sound. And when they stopped, the stillness lingered. You know what screams luxury? Wall-to-wall shag carpeting? You know what screams, why did we do this? Carpet in the bathroom. The 1970s did not care. If there was a floor, it deserved fuzz. Thick, high-pile shag in orange, brown, lime green, even purple. It was not just flooring, it was a lifestyle. You did not walk on it, you sank into it. Entire homes looked like someone tried to upholster the earth. And bathrooms? Somehow, those got the worst of it. Imagine stepping out of a steamy shower onto something that stays damp for days. Mold? Mildew? Minor concerns. At the time, people wanted warmth and comfort from tile to toilet. Carpet went up the walls. It climbed stairs. It matched your drapes and your couch. You vacuumed like it was a full-body workout, because that much fluff did not go down easy. The colors faded. The smells stayed. But at the time, it was pure elegance. Every kid remembers belly flopping onto it during cartoons, or losing small objects in its depths forever. We thought it was cozy. We thought it was chic. We were wrong. But oh, how it felt right at the time. Watching Reading Rainbow or Sesame Street on PBS was like having a warm, familiar friend show up every afternoon. If you were home, it was on. If your parents were working or the power was still on by a miracle, the TV glowed with the colors of those shows. No cable? No problem. PBS came through with free, quality programming that made you feel seen. You learned letters and numbers, sure, but you also learned empathy, kindness, imagination. Reading Rainbow made you want to go to the library and lose yourself in a book. Sesame Street made you laugh and taught you things without ever talking down to you. You knew the characters like they were real people. Big Bird, Bert and Ernie, LeVar Burton, they were the kind of comfort you did not know you needed until you were grown. These shows were the quiet heroes of latchkey kids and working-class households. They filled the gap when your parents were too tired to help with homework or too busy putting food on the table. They did not need a subscription, just a working antenna and a little patience. And to this day, the theme songs still hit you right in the chest because they meant safety, stability, a moment where the world slowed down and felt okay. Barely held on, and a price tag you could actually afford. Piggly Wiggly brand canned vegetables were basic, bland, and absolutely essential in poor households in the 1970s. Peas, corn, green beans, they were all about the same. Software mushy, but they counted. You dumped them into a pot with a little water and margarine and let them heat while the main dish stretched as far as it could. They were not crisp. They were not fresh, but they filled half the plate and made everything else look a little more complete. These cans were never about taste. They were about showing up. You could buy 5 or 6 without blowing your whole budget. They made the plate look full, and that was half the battle. Piggly Wiggly was the store where price mattered more than packaging. Store-brand cans lined the shelves, and smart families grabbed them by the armload. If you had to feed 6 people and could only afford a few bucks worth of sides, this was your aisle. Sometimes you threw them in casseroles, other times you ate them straight. Either way, they were warm, salty, and made the meal feel less like survival and more like supper. They were not glamorous, but they were always there when it mattered. And for anyone trying to stretch every dollar in every dish, that meant everything. You peeled back the DIY asbestos home repairs were once a weekend project, not a professional hazard. In the 1980s, homeowners took pride in doing it themselves, scraping tiles, pulling down insulation, cutting through old cement boards with their bare hands and maybe a dust mask, if that. Asbestos was everywhere, in popcorn ceilings, vinyl floor tiles, wall insulation, pipe wrap. It was cheap, durable, and deadly, though few knew how deadly. People inhaled fibers while remodeling bathrooms, sanding attic walls, or tearing out old basements. There were no warning stickers, no hazmat suits. You might remember helping your parents renovate, the air cloudy with dust and the room echoing with the sound of tools. Some nights, it was the backyard. Other times, it was the town planetarium where the air smelled like metal seats and carpet glue. But either way, Dad made sure you always looked up. He would point at a blinking light in the sky and say something like, "That one's Venus," even if it was just an airplane. You believed him, because he said it with the same certainty he used when fixing the lawnmower. Sometimes he would bring out a telescope that never quite focused right, but it did not matter. You could see the moon, or at least a very bright blur that had to be the moon, and that was enough. He told you about constellations, meteor showers, and a comet he swore he saw when he was 12. The planetarium nights were just as magical. You would lean back in those creaky seats while the ceiling lit up with galaxies and a deep voice narrated the birth of stars. Dad would whisper facts like he had a PhD in astronomy, even if he probably read them from the brochure 5 minutes before. You did not go to learn. You went to dream. And the only thing better than dreaming about space? Digging through the universe of stuff at the local flea market the very next weekend. In the 1980s, every playground had kids playing marbles, but poor kids often got theirs from the discount bin. These marbles looked shiny at first, but chipped quickly, their glass coating peeling or cracking after only a few games. Still, they were treasures in little cloth or plastic bags, carried proudly to school or the park. The chipped edges scratched fingers, and some were cloudy instead of clear, but children did not mind. Each marble was given value: cat's eyes, shooters, or just lucky ones, even if they were all cheap knockoffs. The real fun came in the games, circling chalk lines on sidewalks and flicking marbles across the pavement until knuckles were sore. Kids often argued over rules, making up versions that only benefited whoever was winning. Some marbles were lost forever in cracks of the sidewalk, mourned like fallen soldiers. And when one shattered completely, kids collected the glittering shards, treating them like gems. Parents bought them for pennies, knowing they would not last long. But even a bag of 10 meant a whole afternoon of competition with friends. The marbles rolled under bushes, disappeared into grass, or clinked together until one inevitably cracked, and yet the game continued. Today, collectible marbles are admired for their craftsmanship, but most poor kids only remember the cheap, chipped kind. Do you remember holding one up to the sun, pretending the scratches made it more special? Giant screen under the stars, the crackle of a tinny speaker hanging from your car window, the smell of popcorn, engine exhaust, and summer sweat. If you were lucky enough to grow up in the 1970s, drive-in theaters were your ticket to freedom. $5 for a night out, a movie, and maybe even a first kiss. Families packed into station wagons with lawn chairs and blankets. Teenagers showed up in Mustangs and Chevelles trying to act like James Dean. No one cared if you wore pajamas or brought your own snacks. It was casual magic. A patch of gravel turned into an oasis of glowing screens and shared laughter. And when the second feature came on and the kids were asleep in the back seat, parents finally got a little peace. The whole experience was slow, dreamy, and entirely unlike anything we have today. Today's theaters are cramped and overpriced. Streaming has replaced the ritual. But back then, watching a movie meant being together. There was no pausing, no rewinding. Just you, the screen, and whoever was sitting beside you. The sounds of crickets and car horns mixed with dialogue, and it all felt okay. Now, drive-ins are a fading relic, abandoned lots with crumbling screens and silence where community once lived. How did something so ordinary feel so perfect and become so rare? Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity almost overnight. They were simple, a metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. And if you think delivering milk through a wall sounds wild, wait. Using the oven for heat was not safe, but when it got cold and the furnace was broken, or worse, shut off, you did what you had to. Picture it. The kitchen light off, the oven door cracked open, and the burners running on low. You wrapped up in a thin blanket and sat near it like it was a fireplace. Not ideal. Not even close. But it was better than freezing in your sleep. The air would get dry and heavy. Your mom might scold you to be careful, and your dad might check the carbon monoxide detector, if you had one. Most people didn't. You just kept the door open and hoped it kept you warm through the night. There were times the electric bill was too much. Times when the oil tank was empty, or the gas bill just did not get paid that month. And when you are poor, you do not call a technician. You get creative. You boil water for humidity. You close every door except the kitchen. You sleep with socks, sweaters, and a knit cap on your head. If your nose was cold, you pulled the covers tighter. And somehow, despite the danger and the fear, you made it work. Because you had to. And to this day, that smell, the slightly burnt warm air coming from an oven left on overnight, sticks with you. It was a warning and a comfort, all at once. Brown bags go a long way, never really leaves. Saving S&H green. Stamps or coupons was basically extreme couponing before it was cool. You collected them everywhere, at the grocery store, the gas station, department stores. Little green stamps, sticky-backed and curled at the edges, waiting to be licked and stuck into a booklet. Your mom had a drawer full of them. Or maybe a shoebox. Slowly, carefully, you filled the pages one by one. And when the book was full, you took it to a redemption center, a magical place that looked like a regular store but only dealt in dreams paid with stamps. You could get a toaster, a set of dishes, maybe even a clock radio if you saved enough. Coupons were their own game. You cut them out with dull scissors, sorted them by type, and carried them to the store like golden tickets. Double coupon day? That was the Super Bowl. And you learned young how to recognize a deal, how to stretch a meal, how to find value in places other people overlooked. These little slips of paper were quiet victories, proof that with enough patience, you could earn something real, something new. And when you finally walked out with that item you worked for, not with money, but with effort, it felt like winning a game no one else knew you were playing. They sat on the bottom shelf in the canned food aisle, small, strange, and usually ignored by anyone who did not know what they were. But for poor families, especially those tied to church pantries or Seventh-day Adventist communities, Loma Linda soy meat cans were protein without the price tag of beef. The labels read things like vegetarian burger or fried chick in blocky font. The insides? A beige, spongy blend that looked like mystery meat and smelled just enough like real food to give it a shot. You opened it with hesitation. You dumped it into a pan with hope. And somehow, with the right seasoning, the right sauce, and enough hunger, it worked. It went into casseroles, sloppy Joe mix, or chili. You mashed it with breadcrumbs and eggs. You stirred it into rice or stretched it into sandwiches. It was not meat, and nobody thought it was. But it was filling. It was shelf-stable. It was cheap. For some families, especially those with dietary restrictions or small-town roots, Loma Linda was what you grew up on. You got used to the texture. You made it work. And you thanked God there was something, anything on the shelf when your options were thin. Loma Linda soy meat cans were not celebrated. They were tolerated. And in the hardest moments, that was more than enough. It was not about loving the food. It was about having food at all. Schoolhouse Rock was the rare mix of educational and unforgettable. Launched in the early 1970s, these animated shorts played during cartoon blocks, slipping in lessons between episodes of superheroes and slapstick. But they did not feel like school. They felt like music videos made just for kids, catchy, colorful, and endlessly clever. Conjunction Junction, I'm Just a Bill. 3 is a magic number. These were not just songs. They were memory hooks, hooks that stayed with you for life. Even now, adults who grew up in that era can still sing every word. That is how deep it went. That is how much it mattered. Schoolhouse Rock did not just teach facts, it taught confidence. You could walk into class knowing what an adverb was, not because of your teacher, but because a cartoon train told you so. And you believed it. It gave kids ownership of knowledge. It made learning feel cool. In a time before digital everything, it was one of the first shows to prove that entertainment could be smart without being boring. It was a soundtrack to childhood that made your brain sing. Watching free fireworks at the park was the highlight of summer holidays, especially the 4th of July. Families carried blankets, packed leftover sandwiches, and found a spot on the grass long before the show began. Kids ran around with sparklers or glow sticks while parents chatted and kept an eye on the crowd. Neighbors who barely spoke during the year suddenly felt like family, sharing bug spray, blankets, and stories as the night went on. The whole town seemed to breathe together in anticipation, waiting for that first explosion in the sky. Then, as the sky darkened, everyone leaned back and looked up together. The first boom echoed, and brilliant colors lit the night sky, drawing gasps from children who felt like they were watching magic. It did not matter that you were sitting on itchy grass or swatting mosquitoes. The beauty above was all anyone cared about. For families who could not afford amusement parks or big outings, these public fireworks were a gift. They created the kind of awe that no amount of money could improve, because it was shared by thousands at once. In the 1970s, those nights of explosions and laughter reminded everyone that joy could be free. Windows should fashion on a budget, quite like a pair of pants so bright they could guide aircraft. Yellow, orange, neon green, these were not just colors, they were decisions. Sometimes it was hand-me-downs. Sometimes it was the clearance rack at a discount store that only sold pants in emergency visibility shades. You wore them because they were cheap, and they were yours. Matching shirt optional. Matching confidence required. They were made of stiff polyester or weirdly thin cotton. One wash and the color bled into everything else in the laundry. Your socks? Now yellow. Your gym shirt? Also yellow. You could not blend in wearing these. At school, people saw you coming from the parking lot. Crossing the street, cars slowed down. Your pants did the job of a traffic cone. Even the teacher squinted when you walked in. But you rocked them. You made it work. Maybe they had an elastic waist. Maybe they were bell-bottoms. Maybe they were cut like jeans but fit like sandpaper. Did not matter. They were pants. And if you grew up poor, that was the main requirement. Today, people pay good money for retro pants that look exactly like the ones you got roasted for. But back then, it was not about trends. It was about putting on something clean, something functional, and walking out the door with your head high, even if your pants could signal ships at sea. Rip the paper. Are you kidding? You gently peeled the tape back like you were performing surgery. The carnation powdered milk was a staple in low-income homes during the 1970s, not because anyone loved it, but because it lasted forever and cost less. Fresh milk spoiled fast and hit the budget harder. This stuff, it sat on the shelf until you needed it. It was chalky, it was thin, and if you mixed it wrong, it clumped like paint. But when you were broke, it was milk or close enough. You poured it on cereal, stirred it into mashed potatoes, and used it in baking like it was the real deal. Sometimes parents would stretch a small amount of real milk by mixing it with carnation, hoping no one noticed. Kids did notice, but they drank it anyway, because there was nothing else. Carnation powdered milk was survival in a paper box. It was the kind of thing you bought with food stamps or picked up from food pantries. It did not taste like much, but it meant there would be breakfast tomorrow. And even if it left a strange aftertaste, it also left just enough room in the grocery budget to make it through the week. It cost about a nickel, and it made 2 quarts of color and sugar that kept kids from complaining. Kool-Aid pop beads were not just a craft, they were a lifestyle. These chunky, colorful plastic beads snapped together with a satisfying click, turning into necklaces, bracelets, tiaras, or anything else your imagination dreamed up. Every little girl had a box of them. Every slumber party included at least one fashion show. But pop beads were more than accessories. They were building blocks. They were puzzles. They were surprisingly strong and endlessly versatile. You could pull them apart to start over or wear your creation all day like it was made of gold. They came in every color of the rainbow. Some were clear, some were glittery, some looked like tiny candies. And yes, sometimes you chewed on them even though you were not supposed to. Sometimes they turned into weapons, flicked across the room or used to bind your younger sibling. That was half the fun. Pop beads were part toy, part rebellion. They made you feel creative, independent, grown up even, until one popped off and vanished under the couch, never to be seen again. You always lost one, but the set never felt incomplete. You just made a shorter necklace. Pop beads were a rite of passage in childhood, bright, noisy, and totally unforgettable. Stickball or kick the can was about as bare bones as it gets when it comes to entertainment, but it was the stuff of pure magic. The rules were made up as you went. The equipment was whatever you could find, and the playing field was just the street, the empty lot, or maybe the alley behind your house. All you needed was a stick, an old tennis ball, or maybe just an empty can that had once held beans. You drew bases with chalk or scratched them into dirt, and the whole neighborhood became your stadium. It did not matter if you had 10 kids or only 3. The game always worked, because imagination filled in the gaps. When money was scarce and parents were stretched thin just to keep food on the table, games like this gave kids something priceless. Laughter that echoed down the block, the joy of competition, and the feeling that you were part of something bigger than yourself. The can would clang across the pavement, rolling unpredictably as everyone scrambled to chase it, shouting and laughing so hard your stomach hurt. Sometimes the game went on until the sun dropped low, until you could barely see the ball in the fading light. Sometimes neighbors came out to yell about the noise or about a dented trash lid, but even that became part of the fun. These games did not cost a penny, yet they became memories that lasted a lifetime. Looking back, they were more than just street games. They were proof that even in the leanest years, joy did not have a price tag. Shakey's Pizza Parlor was a party with a crust. It was not just about the food. It was about the vibe. communal tables, player pianos, arcade games, and pitchers of root beer big enough to share with the whole baseball team. It was the kind of place where you celebrated little league wins or just blew off steam with family. In the 1980s, Shakey's had a footprint that spanned the country. They were early pioneers in the idea that dining could be entertainment. But as the 90s approached, everything changed. Pizza Hut and Domino's embraced delivery. Kids wanted gaming consoles, not clunky arcades, and families wanted quicker, cheaper meals without all the noise. Shakey's tried to adapt, but the charm wore thin. Locations started closing. The ones that remained felt trapped in time. And not in the cool, nostalgic way. Just dated. The brand lives on in small pockets, especially overseas. But for most Americans, it disappeared quietly. All that is left is the memory of paper cups, thick crust, and a place that felt like your own little pizza carnival. Now, it is mostly just a name that makes people say, "Oh wow, I haven't thought about that in years." Television antennas in the 1960s were a test of both engineering skill and sheer audacity. You'd climb up on the roof with a giant metal rod, twist it until the static cleared, and shout down to someone inside for feedback. A little to the left, when you asked for ice cream, what you got came in a cardboard brick and had the personality of frozen glue. It said vanilla on the label, but that was more of a suggestion than a flavor. It was stiff, icy, and tasted like a memory of milk. You did not scoop it, you sawed into it with a butter knife and prayed it would soften before dinner ended. There were no chunks, no swirls, just an oddly translucent white that never quite melted. You could tap your spoon on it like a drumstick. One side always had freezer burn that made your tongue numb, but you still fought for the last piece. Sometimes the only topping was a drizzle of leftover chocolate syrup that barely squirted out of the bottle. You needed a chainsaw just to scoop it. By the time it softened, you no longer wanted it, but you ate it anyway. Because it was cold, and it was sweet enough. This was not name brand. It was frozen dessert, and it melted into a strange foam if left out too long. It had no creamy swirl, no chocolate ribbon, no cookie bits, just vague vanilla and freezer burn. And sometimes it came with a plastic knife to serve it. You could cut perfect squares, but not because it was fancy, because it was frozen solid. Still, on a hot summer day, it was the best you had. And when your neighbor brought home actual ice cream, you stared, but you smiled, because your brick was waiting in the freezer, and it was all yours. Getting haircuts at home, or worse, bowl cuts in the kitchen, was a rite of passage for kids growing up without much extra money. There was no trip to the barber or the salon. You sat on a stool or a dining chair, and someone in your family did the best they could. A pair of scissors, a towel, and a deep breath. That was the full setup. Sometimes it was your mom, sometimes your dad, sometimes an older sibling who had watched someone do it once. Bangs too short, uneven sides, a mysterious line on the back of your head. You would look in the mirror and sigh. That was the whole point. Haircuts cost money, money that could go to groceries, gas, or school supplies. And if your family had more than one kid, everyone got the same cut, like a production line. Saturday morning trims, sweeping hair off the kitchen floor. Looking back now, it is kind of sweet. That chaos haircut came from love, from doing your best with what you had. Lid with that little curl of metal and tried not to spill the oil. Store-brand tuna and oil was a cheap protein that showed up again and again in poor families' kitchens during the 1970s. It was fish, it was affordable, and it made a can of something feel like an actual meal. It had a strong smell, and the oil always made a mess. But you mixed it with mayonnaise, spooned it onto crackers, stirred it into pasta, or stuffed it into white bread sandwiches. Sometimes it stretched far enough to feed 3 people. Other times you ate it right from the can. You did not buy tuna because it was delicious. You bought it because it filled the gap. It was the kind of food that kept you going when the fridge was empty. It might not have tasted great, but it got the job done. It was shelf-stable, long-lasting, and cheap enough to buy in bulk when it was on sale. You did not buy the brand name stuff unless you had a coupon. But the store brand worked just fine. It was not about gourmet. It was about getting by. And in a world where protein was expensive and time was tight, canned tuna in oil got the job done. You might not have liked it, but you learned to appreciate it. And if you grew up on it, the taste is probably still buried somewhere in your memory. You pulled it from the freezer, peeled back the foil, and popped it into the oven with a prayer that the brownie would not burn before the peas unfroze. Half the pieces were a staple of family weekends, and no one ever seemed to mind. Maybe the dice were lost, maybe the hotels in Monopoly were replaced with buttons, or maybe you were using scraps of paper to stand in for pawns. The important thing was not whether the game was perfect, it was that you were playing together. Kids bickered over rules, parents stepped in as referees, and everyone laughed when the makeshift pieces fell apart mid-game. The creativity needed to keep these games. If you had socks, they were probably long, really long. Tube socks that reached your knees and made you look like you were trying out for a retro Olympics team. You wore them with shorts, with sneakers, with dress shoes if you had to. They were white, or close to white, with maybe a couple of colored stripes. One sock always sagged, one always refused to. Matching was optional. Comfort was rare. You rolled them, you folded them, you stuffed them into shoes like a second pair of pants. No one asked if they looked good. That was not the point. The point was, they were clean, they were available, and you did not outgrow them yet. Every once in a while, someone gave you new socks for Christmas, and you cheered, because tube socks were currency, and no one wanted to spend money on the fancy ankle kind. Those socks, they lasted forever. Even when the heel wore out and slid halfway up your calf, you kept wearing them, because socks were socks, and yours had seen things. When you ran out of shampoo, food stamp booklets were never just coupons. They were survival printed on pastel-colored paper. If you ever held one in your hand, you know the feeling. They came in booklets, with each stamp marked by a dollar value, and they looked like Monopoly money to anyone who did not need them. But to the people who did, they were the difference between groceries or going hungry. You had to use them carefully, precisely. Some stores treated you like dirt for using them. The cashier might sigh. The people in line behind you might stare. But your mom? She kept her head up and made it stretch. You could not use them for everything, though. No toilet paper, no hot food, definitely no treats. But you learned what they could buy, and you learned fast. Powdered milk, canned beans, off-brand cereal. Maybe a block of cheddar if you got lucky. It was humbling, sure, but it also taught you about budgeting before you even knew what that word meant. And let us be real, the embarrassment never fully faded. Kids at school noticed. "Oh, your mom used food stamps?" Like it was an insult. But the truth is, it meant your family found a way. It meant your parents were doing their best with what they had. And you learned how to be resourceful, proud, and quiet about the things other people took for granted. That paper had power, even if nobody else saw it. About surviving with pride. It came in that iconic blue box with a tiny foil packet of cheese powder. And if you grew up poor in the 1970s, you probably had it more than you care to admit. Kraft macaroni and cheese was fast, cheap, and filling, and that was the whole point. You boiled the elbows, drained them, stirred in milk, butter, and that orange dust, and somehow it turned into dinner. Not fancy, not special, just enough. It was a lifesaver for single moms, tired dads, and babysitters who needed to get something in front of a hungry kid in 5 minutes. The cheese was salty, smooth, and tasted like comfort, even if you knew it came out of a packet. Some families dressed it up with canned peas or cut-up hot dogs. Others just served it straight and called it a meal. You would see that blue box stacked high in grocery carts when money was tight. It was the kind of thing you bought 5 at a time because it would get you through the week. Nobody bragged about it, but everybody ate it. And for poor families in the 1970s, Kraft macaroni and cheese was not just food. It was a little relief in a boiling pot of water. It filled empty bellies and bought time until the next paycheck. And sometimes, that was more than enough. You tore open the paper pouch, poured the white dust into a pitcher, added water, and hoped it would taste even cleaner. Homemade sock puppets were not toys from a store, they were toys from a drawer. You grabbed an old sock, one that had lost its match or had a hole near the toe, and brought it to life. You could glue on buttons for eyes, draw a mouth with marker, cut up yarn for hair if you had some lying around. If not, you just used your fingers and imagination. You slipped it on your hand and gave it a voice. A silly one, a deep one, whatever made your siblings laugh or annoyed your parents just enough. It lived in shoebox theaters and behind couch cushions. It had adventures in cereal boxes and battles in laundry baskets. You made up whole worlds with nothing but scraps. That puppet had feelings. It had drama. It had a full-on personality. You did not need a TV show. You made your own. Right there in the living room, using a sock and a stack of couch cushions. Even if the eyes fell off or the mouth smeared, you kept performing. Because when you were poor, entertainment was not downloaded. It was stitched together, one laugh at a time. And years later, you might not remember the sock's name, but you remember how it made you feel. Funny, creative, enough. Walking to the public library was a quiet adventure, one that cost nothing but time and offered rewards beyond measure. For kids who could not afford movie tickets or new toys, the library was a palace filled with treasures stacked floor to ceiling. The smell of old books, the hush of turning pages, and the cool blast of air conditioning in the summer made it feel like a sanctuary. You might walk in with no plan, wander the aisles, and come out with a stack of mysteries, adventures, or comic collections that kept you busy all week. Story time was another highlight, with groups of kids gathered cross-legged on the floor, hanging on every word as a librarian brought characters to life. Some kids treated the library as a social hangout too, meeting friends at the long wooden tables and whispering over magazines they were not supposed to bend. For parents, it was free childcare, a safe space where they could trust their children to spend hours learning or simply escaping into imagination. A library card was more valuable than any wallet full of bills because it opened doors to entire worlds without costing a cent. In the 1970s, especially for families with little money, the library was proof that joy, knowledge, and wonder were available to anyone willing to walk through the doors. Until you hear about the homes that were designed for smoke. Back in the middle of the 20th century, smoking was not just accepted, it was expected, and American homes were ready for it. That is where built-in ashtray stands came in. These were not just ashtrays placed on coffee tables or countertops. No, these were recessed, often permanent fixtures embedded right into walls, armrests, and even lampstands. You could walk into a living room, and there it was, your own little designated smoke spot, classy as could be. Some were ceramic, some were chrome. A few even had lids to keep the ashes tidy. And they were everywhere, in kitchens, in bathrooms, in bedrooms. The ultimate sign of a home that was with it. Even guests had their own designated ashtrays. People took pride in them. Some were decorative, shaped like seashells or horseshoes. Others were sleek and utilitarian, and it was not just adults using them. Teens had their own, often built into the back of desks or vanities. Today, of course, the idea seems almost alien. We cover smoke detectors in foil just to cook without setting them off. But back then, these ashtrays were part of the home's soul. And when the culture shifted, they vanished fast, ripped out, tiled over, or collecting dust as relics of a time no one wants to remember, but no one can forget. But the next room? Oh, that is where the real memories were made. Think beanbags, shag carpet, and absolute chaos. Limited layaway at Kmart or Sears was not just a payment option, it was hope stretched over time. If your parents could not afford the full cost of a coat, a toy, or even a new pair of school shoes, layaway gave them a way to still say yes. You would walk the aisles, pick something out, and bring it to the counter. Not to take home, but to lock away in the back. Safe. Waiting. Each week your mom or dad would go back and make a payment. $5 here, $10 there. Slowly, piece by piece, they chipped away at the balance. And when the final payment was made, you got to bring it home like it was brand new because it was. It might have been hidden in a stockroom for weeks, but it still had that store smell, that shine. that feeling of finally having something you had wished for. Layaway meant crisp flat in your hands, and if you folded it just right, it turned into a doughy ball. Wonder Bread was not fancy. It was white, sweet, and stripped of anything remotely whole grain. But in poor homes in the 1970s, it was lunch, it was breakfast, and sometimes it was dinner. You slapped peanut butter on it, fried bologna, mayonnaise and tomato, sugar and butter when nothing else was left. It tore easily, went stale quickly, and stuck to the roof of your mouth. But it was always there. It was the bread that filled bellies without asking much in return. You never thought about fiber or nutrition. You thought about having enough. It was soft enough for babies and cheap enough for everyone. The bag had that bright red, yellow, and blue polka dot pattern that made it feel more cheerful than it had any right to be. It cost less than other brands but felt like a name you could trust. You packed it in school lunches, served it with canned soup, or toasted it when you needed something hot. Wonder Bread was not about flavor or nutrition. It was about getting through the day, feeding a family on $5 and making it stretch to Friday. It was a loaf that went with everything and judged nothing. And in a house where the penny candy and toy capsule prizes were the original budget jackpot. You walked into the corner store or gas station with a handful of change and walked out like you had hit the lottery. A paper sack filled with wax lips, candy cigarettes, sour balls, and licorice ropes. Maybe a gumball that cracked your molars. Maybe a rubber monster from the capsule machine by the door. You turned the dial, heard that heavy clunk, and opened the clear dome to reveal a tiny treasure. Sometimes it was a sticky hand. Sometimes it was a cheap plastic ring. Sometimes it was a disappointment, but it was yours. You pressed your face to the glass dome trying to pick your favorite before the crank decided your fate. You shook the capsule like it might turn into something better if you just gave it a second. You kept the best prizes in a box or hid them from your siblings like they were state secrets. And if the toy broke in 5 minutes, you still bragged about it like it was a trophy. Because even tiny treasures felt big when they were yours to pick. You kept the capsules and reused them, storing your own trinkets inside like they were crown jewels. The candy was not gourmet, but it was sugar. And sugar was gold when you were a kid with no allowance. You planned every penny, measured every treat, and learned the real meaning of value. Because back then, joy came cheap, but it still meant the world. One nickel, one bite, one little thrill at a time. And somehow those tiny prizes left the biggest memories. Family picnics with bologna sandwiches were the highlight of many weekends, even if they were simple affairs. There was no fancy catering, no store-bought fried chicken in a bucket, and definitely no elaborate spreads. Mom wrapped bologna sandwiches in wax paper, maybe tossed in some potato chips from a half-empty bag, and grabbed a jug of lemonade or sweet tea. The cooler was dented, the blanket had holes, and the ants always seemed to find you no matter where you sat. But the magic was in the togetherness, not the menu. Families piled into cars that rattled with every mile, drove to the nearest park, and claimed a patch of grass like it was their private retreat. Kids ran wild, playing tag, climbing trees, or daring each other to roll down hills, while parents relaxed in the shade, chatting and keeping an eye out. Sometimes you had neighbors join in, and the picnic turned into a whole community event with food swapped back and forth. There were no restaurant bills, no worrying about whether the kids would like what was served. Everyone ate the same thing, and somehow those sandwiches, humble as they were, tasted like the best thing in the world. For poor families in the 1970s, those picnics were more than meals. They were moments of joy carved out of struggle, a chance to feel rich in laughter, even if your wallet said otherwise. Collecting Kool-Aid was supposed to be sweet, but if you were poor in the 1980s, it tasted like liquid heartbreak. You used the whole packet, sure, but only half the sugar, maybe less depending on how payday went. The color looked right, but the flavor? Sour sadness with a hint of grape. You would stare at the jug like it betrayed you. Your mom would stir it with a wooden spoon and say, "It's fine, just drink it cold." Friends with name-brand juice boxes looked at you like you were drinking cleaning fluid. You tried to fix it by adding more sugar, but that made a gritty layer at the bottom. and when it separated in the fridge, you had two choices: syrup at the top or colored water below. You would stir it and taste it and then stir it again, hoping somehow the second sip would be sweeter. It never was, but you drank it anyway, because it was cold and purple and yours. You served it in mismatched cups and filled them to the brim. Sometimes there was so little sugar that it made your lips pucker. It was like drinking regret with ice. But no one complained. You made it last, because Kool-Aid was the cheapest juice around, and if you were really broke, you saved the last half for later like it was vintage wine. Today, people complain if their drinks are not organic or have too much corn syrup. Back then, if it was cold and colorful, it was good enough. Aluminum foil on rabbit ear antennas was every poor kid's first lesson in just make it work. The TV never had a great signal to begin with, and those antennas, thin metal rods sticking out like bug legs, were always bent, loose, or barely holding on. So someone, usually your dad or older sibling, would wrap foil around the tips, twisting and shaping it like it was some kind of science experiment. Did it help? Sometimes. Sometimes it made it worse. But you tried anyway, holding the antenna just right, standing at weird angles, praying for the static to clear. You would say, "There, right there, don't move," and then someone would walk by and ruin it. It was trial and error, every day. You learned patience, creativity, how to accept good enough. And once the picture settled, once that wavy black and white mess turned into a clear show, you felt like a genius, or at least lucky, because now you could watch the game, or the news, or cartoons, without spending a dime. That foil was not just about TV, it was about making do, about solving a problem with whatever you had on hand. And every household had that one person who could fix the picture like magic. Even if that magic was just a crumpled ball of foil and some stubborn hope. Using a rotary or push-button wall phone was like wooden tops were what you got before fancy spinning toys existed, or before you could afford them. These were the toys your grandfather might have carved, or your older cousin handed down with a string and some rules you never fully understood. They were small, solid, and felt important in your palm. The good ones had that perfect balance, where a single flick of the wrist could send it spinning for what felt like hours. Most times, you just tried to make it stand upright. You wrapped the string tight, held your breath, and pulled hard like it mattered more than anything. Then you'd watch it whirl, wobble, and finally give in to gravity. And for those few seconds, you felt like you had control over something in the world. It did not always spin right. Sometimes it hit a crack in the floor or a pebble in the dirt and toppled instantly. But that just made the good spins feel even better. Tops could be plain wood or painted with simple stripes. If you were lucky, someone had burned a design into the bottom. They did not make noise. They did not light up. But they did something even better. They gave you a challenge. And when you finally got it to spin perfectly, even just once, you felt like a champion. Neighborhood car wash fundraisers were part work, part fun, and all about community spirit. Kids grabbed buckets, soap, and sponges, set up homemade signs on street corners, and waved down passing cars. For a couple of dollars, they scrubbed every inch, splashing each other with hoses and turning the chore into a game. Every so often, someone's dad would pull up in a dusty car just to give the kids a big job, grinning as the crew went to work. The satisfaction of seeing a shining car drive away made you feel like you had accomplished something that mattered. The work was messy, the water was often cold, and someone always ended up soaked, but the laughter never stopped. Sometimes the money went toward a school trip or a sports team, but often it was just pocket change to split between friends. Parents supervised, offering tips on rinsing and polishing, while neighbors drove by just to support the kids. For poor families in the 1970s, this was a way to teach responsibility, earn a little cash, and bond with friends all at once. And nothing felt better than finishing the day tired, wet, and proud of what you accomplished. Patching. Forget rabbit ears, you had coat hangers. Reception in the 1980s was not about technology. It was about physics, patience and standing on one foot while holding a wire hanger at a 17-degree angle near the television. You would twist it, bend it, jam it into the back of the TV, and suddenly, perfect picture. Until you moved. Then it was back to static and blurry game shows. Someone in the family always claimed to be the antenna whisperer. That meant you held the hanger while everyone else watched. If you let go, the screen fuzzed over, and you became the villain of the household. Some hangers were wrapped in foil like space-age art projects. Others had split ends from being fine-tuned with pliers. You tried balancing it on books, soda cans, even your little brother's head, anything to avoid touching it yourself. Every channel had its own sweet spot, and finding it was like unlocking a combination lock you did not know you had. Your only reward? Maybe catching half an episode of Knight Rider before someone walked in front of the screen and ruined everything. Today, people complain if their Wi-Fi dips for 2 seconds. But back then, we fought gravity and metal to watch cartoons. And honestly, that fuzzy, half-clear picture, it still felt like magic. Micronauts were not household names like G.I. Joe or Star Wars toys, but for the kids who loved them, they were everything. Small, strange, and endlessly customizable, Micronauts were the science fiction building blocks of your imagination. Released in the late 1970s, they came with magnetic limbs, clear plastic torsos, interchangeable armor, and ships you could take apart and reconfigure 100 different ways. There was no show at first, no comic book. Just you and your mind, filling in the gaps. What planet did they come from? What powers did they have? It did not matter. You decided. The Micronauts were yours. One day they were heroes. The next, they were villains. Their limbs could pop off. Their vehicles turned into bases, walkers, or weapons. They were not just action figures. They were tools for storytelling. And every kid who had a handful knew the thrill of inventing whole galaxies on the living room floor. While other toys had scripts, Micronauts had potential. They invited you to build the adventure, not just follow it. They were futuristic, weird, and wild, and that made them unforgettable. In a time before everything came with instructions, Micronauts handed you the pieces and whispered, "Go create." The camera and film shop was a cathedral of forgotten technology. You walked in, and the air smelled like chemicals and time. Behind the counter, rows of yellow Kodak envelopes waited like tiny mysteries. Dad would head straight for the slide carousel projectors, lifting one like it was a sacred artifact. "Kodachrome," he would whisper. "They just don't make colors like that anymore." You did not know what he meant, but you believed it. You spun the projector just to hear the satisfying click, click, click of slides falling into place. There were shelves of lenses, tripods, flash bulbs in boxes older than you, and glass cases of second-hand cameras that looked more like museum pieces. Dad talked shop with the clerk, dropping words like aperture and ISO like he was reading from scripture. You picked up a Polaroid and tried to figure out how it worked. The clerk let you snap one. The photo came out blurry, overexposed, but it still felt like magic. Dad bought a roll of film, maybe 2, even though he already had 6 at home. "Just in case," he would say, just in case the light hit right. And on the drive home, with the bag of film in his lap, he would say, "One quick stop." That stop? A smoky little pool hall where you got a taste of grown-up cool, even if just for one night. If one of these toys brought back a smile or reminded you what fun looked like when you had to make it yourself, drop your favorite in the comments. Give this video a like to keep the memories spinning, and subscribe so you never miss the good stuff we grew up with. Holes in the knees, sewn shut with denim cut from old jeans, elbows wearing thin, covered in colorful scraps stitched with uneven lines and quiet determination. Every patch was a story, a game of tag gone too far, a tumble off a bike, a season of growth that stretched fabric past its limit. You did not throw things out, you fixed them. Because replacing a pair of pants was not always an option. Your mom had a sewing kit in an old cookie tin, filled with thread that never matched and buttons that had seen better days. She worked at the kitchen table, bent over your clothes like a surgeon, making something broken last just a little longer. You might have felt embarrassed. You might have tugged your sleeves to hide the stitching. But those patches were love in disguise. They meant someone cared enough to keep you dressed, even if the clothes were tired. They meant you kept going. Sometimes those patches were loud. Bright fabric that clashed with the shirt, a cartoon print stitched onto plain denim, whatever scrap was closest to the sewing basket. And sometimes they were nearly invisible, matched carefully to hide what had torn. Either way, you knew where they were. You could trace each one with your fingers. They scratched a little when new. They softened over time. On cold mornings, you sat still while your mom pinned a square over a frayed spot, asking you to hold your arms up or turn around so she could get it right. It was uncomfortable, but it meant you were cared for. No one wasted thread on clothes they did not plan to keep, and no one stayed up late mending knees if they did not believe you were worth the effort. Some patches covered wear and tear, others covered stains you could never quite get out. But all of them did the same thing. They gave your clothes a second life, and in the process, they gave you a quiet kind of dignity. You might not have had new clothes, but you had something better. Clothes that were saved, like you, again and again. And in a world where appearances mattered too much, patches were the proof that making do was still doing enough. You were worn, but you were whole. Visiting garage sales was like treasure hunting on a budget, and poor families in the 1970s embraced it wholeheartedly. Every weekend, neighborhoods sprouted makeshift shops on front lawns, tables covered with knickknacks, clothes, toys, and books. For kids, the thrill was in rummaging through boxes of mismatched action figures, worn board games, or stacks of comic books that cost only a quarter. Parents searched for kitchenware, furniture, or clothes that could be patched and reused. Sometimes you found exactly what you were hoping for: a new-to-you bike, a lamp, or a winter coat for cheap. Other times it was about the thrill of the hunt, walking away with something you did not know you wanted until you saw it. Bargaining was part of the fun too, shaving a few cents off the price while chatting with neighbors. Families made entire outings of it, hopping from sale to sale, comparing finds, and laughing at the odd treasures on display. Garage sales offered a chance to bring home something new without straining the family budget. For kids, it felt like Christmas morning on an ordinary Saturday. Proof that joy could be found in someone else's leftovers. Fishing at the disco was not just a hobby, it was a way of becoming someone else for a night. You laced up your skates like you were putting on a costume, stepped into that pulsating rink, and suddenly you were untouchable. The music was always booming: Donna Summer, Chic, Bee Gees, and the lights spun like wild stars trapped in a mirrored galaxy. The disco ball wasn't just decoration, it was a lighthouse, a guidepost, a disco deity above your head as you twirled in polyester. Whether you were gliding like a pro or holding onto the rail for dear life, you were part of the show. Everyone was, because it wasn't just about the moves, it was about the vibe. The outfits were louder than the music: metallic pants, crop tops, rainbow suspenders, headbands slick with sweat. You didn't have to be good, you just had to be in. And when the whole rink synced to the beat, it felt like the world was healing itself, one backwards crossover at a time. The funny part? Most of us fell more than we skated. But no one cared. You'd laugh, crawl back up, and keep going. Because the floor was freedom, and for one glorious hour, under those spinning lights, nothing else mattered. Right out of the humble neighborhoods of the Midwest, specifically Mankato, Minnesota, Happy Chef, which first debuted in 1963, became known for its classic American diner fare, which included a lot of recognizable breakfast dishes and burgers. It also took some notes out of McDonald's playbook, as each location had this really eye-catching statue of the restaurant's mascot, which was a smiling, happy chef. The statue would be holding a spoon and a menu board, and some of those statues even spoke to customers, making it really popular with children. At its peak, it was around 60 locations strong, and those were more or less primarily in Minnesota and the neighboring states, but what it aimed to do, it did well. It had a regional grip that competitors couldn't shake off, And that gave a lot of other restaurants down the road the idea of having strong fan bases with your local regional communities rather than trying to capture a nationwide audience. Yo-yos from the dime store were a test of patience wrapped in plastic. You picked one out by color, bright red, neon green, or maybe clear with glitter inside, and hoped it actually worked. Sometimes it did, sometimes it tangled the second you tried a trick. But that was half the fun. You practiced over and over. Walk the dog, rock the cradle, loop the loop. Most of the time you just made it go down and back up. The string got dirty fast and the yo-yo cracked if it hit the sidewalk wrong, but you kept trying. You compared tricks at recess, even if the other kid's yo-yo cost 3 times as much. And if you could get it to sleep, just for 2 seconds, you felt like a magician. You kept it in your pocket, scuffed and worn, like a badge of determination. And no matter how many knots you had to untangle, you came back for more. It was not just about skill, it was about persistence. And every time that little toy made its way back to your hand, it felt like a tiny win. Hiking or exploring the woods near home was one of those timeless adventures that cost nothing but gave kids everything. Even if it was just a few acres of scraggly trees behind a row of houses or a patch of brush near the railroad tracks, to a child's imagination it was an untamed wilderness. Kids collected sticks, piled them together into forts, and declared themselves kings or explorers charting unknown land. They carried peanut butter sandwiches or maybe just a canteen filled with warm tap water, and they stayed out until dusk, their parents calling from porches when it was time to come home. The woods became battlefields for stick swords, treasure grounds for bottle caps, or secret hideouts where you whispered plans like real adventurers. Every rustle in the leaves felt like a clue. Every squirrel or rabbit was a wild beast to track, and sometimes you swore you saw something mysterious just beyond the tree line. These explorations gave kids a taste of freedom, the feeling that they could go anywhere and do anything, even if they never left their small town. For poor kids in the 1970s, a hike did not mean mountains and state parks. It meant backyard wilderness turned into endless stories. Homemade. You opened a garbage bag full of clothes that smelled like attic and disappointment, and that was back to school shopping. The sizes were wrong, the styles were weird, and the colors? Questionable. But your mom said, "They are perfectly good." You learned how to hem pants with safety pins. You figured out how to stretch a too small t-shirt just enough to breathe in it. And those vintage pieces? They were not cool yet. They were just old. But you wore them like armor because saying thank you was part of the deal. If someone teased you, you said, "At least I've got clothes," even when it stung. You wore jeans with patches on patches, shirts with names that were not yours, and sweaters that screamed 1974. If the sleeves were too long, you rolled them. If the pants were too short, you wore taller socks. Every kid had that one shirt they hated, but had to wear because it was still in good shape. Yours probably had a cartoon character you had never heard of. You got teased, but you just shrugged. Because clothes were clothes, and you had bigger things to worry about, like making sure your off-brand sneakers did not fall apart by recess. Fashion was optional. Warmth was not. You made it work. Waiting for public access TV or Saturday morning cartoons was like waiting for magic to turn on. You had no streaming, no on-demand, no do-overs. If you missed it, you missed it. So you got up early, bowl of cereal in hand, eyes glued to the screen as the test pattern faded out. You knew the schedule like a ritual. Cartoons first, the good kind, Looney Tunes, the Smurfs, maybe some He-Man if you were lucky. After that came the weirder, slower stuff, and eventually public access shows that had the charm of homemade school projects. But you watched anyway, because it was something. Something free, something yours. That old television with the static-filled sound and fuzzy picture was a window to a world that felt colorful and exciting, even if the reception was garbage. You adjusted the volume carefully so you did not wake anyone else in the house. And if your favorite show was coming on, you sat still like it was church. For those few hours, you were not poor, not tired, not worried about anything. You were just a kid living inside a cartoon. It was sacred. Silly, but sacred. And the second it ended, you went outside, rerunning the episode in your head like a prized memory. The oddball roadside museum was where logic went to take a nap. You saw the hand-painted sign from the highway. Come see the world's largest pencil, or America's first toaster, still works. Dad would swerve into the gravel lot like it was destiny. Admission was cheap, $3 cash only, and worth every penny. The inside was a fever dream. Display cases filled with bottle caps from all 50 states. A whole wall dedicated to vintage shampoo bottles. A two-headed taxidermy calf that haunted your dreams for a week. "You brought the kid today, huh?" he would say, as if Dad came here weekly. You followed them through rooms of strange collections while Dad laughed and read every single placard out loud. It was like watching a kid in a candy store, only the candy was lawn darts, Pez dispensers, and World War II ration kits. "Now this," Dad would say, holding up a glass jar with something floating in it. "This is history." And even though you rolled your eyes, part of you agreed. But if you really want to feel history in motion, just wait until you join him by the old train tracks, watching boxcars roll by, counting like your life depended on it. Hand-me-down baseball gloves and pickup games filled empty lots and schoolyards with shouts of joy. The gloves were worn thin, sometimes stitched together with string, and the baseballs were often scuffed beyond recognition. But none of that mattered when you had enough kids to field a game. Someone would drag out old bats, a rock became home plate, and the dusty lot transformed into a major league stadium. Kids argued over who would pitch, who got stuck in the outfield, and whether a hit counted as fair or foul. Even if the teams were uneven, the game went on, inning after inning, until the ball was too lost in the shadows to see. Parents leaned on fences, watching and smiling, glad to see their kids occupied without needing a penny spent. The thrill of hitting the ball, rounding the makeshift bases, and sliding into home left memories as strong as any professional game. Poor kids in the 1970s did not need uniforms or perfect fields. They just needed a little space, a lot of energy, and each other. And it usually did. It lived in the living room, and so did you. Forget bedrooms. Every night became a family campout on the carpet. You dragged blankets, pillows, and every couch cushion you could find and stacked them like survival gear. Someone always got the good corner near the heater. Someone always got stuck by the drafty window. You learned to rotate positions like it was assigned seating at a survival school. The heater clicked on and off, rattling like an old engine. And every time it stopped, you held your breath, hoping it would come back. When it kicked in again, pure relief. You toasted your toes until they were half cooked, then flipped over to warm the other side. Snoring echoed. Siblings squirmed. Someone's elbow was always in your ribs. But nobody complained, because being cold everywhere else was worse. The dog joined the pile. So did the cat. At some point, it felt more like a weird slumber party than suffering. Today, thermostats are on apps. But back then, if you wanted to be warm, you slept where the heat lived. And sometimes, you never wanted to leave that carpet cave. If you could bend your arm, the event. When money was tight and bacon was just a dream from television commercials, Bologna stepped in like a budget hero. You threw a slice on a plate, popped it in the microwave, and waited for the magic to happen. Within seconds, the edges curled up like it was auditioning to be a flower, and the smell filled the kitchen like a carnival that only sold grease. No one knew why it curled. No one cared. It was crispy on the edges, chewy in the center, and full of flavor that was, well, something. You slapped it on white bread with mustard, and suddenly it was dinner. Fancy dinner if you added cheese. Sometimes it would bubble in the middle like a meat blister, and that was when you knew it was perfect. You might try to press it flat, but it always fought back. Bologna had a will of its own. And if it popped and hit the inside of the microwave, you just wiped it off with a napkin and kept going. Kids today do not know the joy of a single slice of bologna doing a gymnastics routine in the microwave. But if you grew up broke, you knew that curling edge meant you were about to eat something hot, salty, and surprisingly satisfying. No one served it at parties. It was not gourmet, but it was a treat. A little piece of processed perfection on a budget that made you feel like dinner had a soundtrack. Nothing said. Church or charity clothing drives were quiet lifelines that showed up just when families needed them most. You would walk into a community center, or maybe a church basement, and there would be folding tables lined with donated clothes, shirts, shoes, jackets, jeans, all sorted by size if you were lucky. Sometimes there were handwritten signs, sometimes just piles. You would dig through the stacks with your mom or grandma, hoping to find something warm that actually fit. If you found something halfway decent, you held onto it like treasure. It was not just about clothes. It was about dignity, about making it through the winter without freezing, about having something to wear to school that did not scream, "I am struggling." These drives meant someone in your neighborhood cared. They meant someone had your back, even if you did not know who. There were moments where you picked out a dress or a jacket that someone else had outgrown, and somehow it still felt new. Sure, it might smell like a stranger's laundry soap, but you wore it with pride. Maybe it had a patch, or maybe the zipper stuck. But it was yours. And when you outgrew it, you bagged it up and passed it on. Because that was the deal. What helped you once could help someone else next. That was the unspoken rule of growing up poor. You shared what little you had, because that little still meant a lot. Bottom shelf, wrapped in plain plastic with a no-frills logo. And if your family was poor in the 1970s, it was what you reached for every time. Western family toilet paper was thin, scratchy, and barely rolled straight, but it was cheap, and that was enough. You bought it in bulk. You used it sparingly. You stacked it in closets, kept it in the glove compartment, and never let the last roll run out. It was not something you talked about, but you noticed when it was gone. It lasted just long enough to get through the week. You folded it instead of crumpling it to make it go further. You knew the feel of it without looking, and you silently thanked it for just being there when it mattered. It was not soft, it was not strong, but it was toilet paper, and in households where the budget was tight, sometimes that was a luxury all its own. No one talked about it, but everyone used it. It was a quiet necessity, wrapped in a label that promised value instead of comfort. Western family toilet paper was not about quality. It was about making sure your home had the basics, whether they were pleasant or not. It came in a cardboard box filled. Plastic army men were sold by the bag, and if you were lucky, the bag was big. You got dozens of tiny soldiers for under $1. They came in green, sometimes tan or gray, and each one had a different pose, crawling, aiming, charging with a bayonet. They were stiff, light, and rough around the edges, literally. Half of them still had the plastic mold seams sticking out like little battle scars. You spread them out on the floor or lined them up in the dirt, ready for war. You did not care about historical accuracy. These guys had one job: make noise and take hits. You would flick marbles at them or throw pebbles until only one was left standing. Sometimes you built bunkers out of books. Sometimes you buried the losers in the sandbox like fallen heroes. One would always lose a leg. Another would get melted by accident. You kept them anyway. You gave them names, rivalries, missions. Even though they could not move, they had stories. And they went with you everywhere, stuffed in pockets, backpacks, even hidden under pillows. It did not matter that they were cheap. They were yours. And when the battles were over, you lined them back up, ready to go again tomorrow. They were quiet, unbreakable, and loyal, just like the kids who played with them. Remember clacker toys? You probably also remember getting smacked in the face. These were two solid acrylic balls connected by a string, meant to be swung up and down until they clacked together above and below your hand. That was the whole toy. No batteries, no screen. Just two hard spheres ready to leave a bruise. And kids loved them. The louder and faster they clacked, the cooler you were. It was a skill to master. Get the rhythm right, and you could keep them going for minutes. Get it wrong, and you got a nasty surprise. Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Hospitals probably kept a few on hand just to demonstrate what not to do. They were loud, dangerous, and oddly satisfying. For a few wild years, clackers were everywhere, on sidewalks, in classrooms, and hidden under beds when they got taken away. Eventually, safety concerns shut them down, but not before a generation got their fill of noise and near misses. They were outlawed in some places, but that only made them cooler. If you ever got them moving just right, you remember the thrill, and maybe a headache to go with it. They were chaos in toy form, and we would not have had it any other way. Summer heat was not battled. It was endured. Air conditioning was for rich people, department stores, and maybe the library. At home, you shoved a fan in the window and hoped it would suck in cool air. If the fan was old, it made more noise than wind, but that was still better than nothing. You flipped it around, tried every angle, put bowls of ice in front of it like some kind of home science experiment. Sometimes it worked. Usually, it just blew hot air in your face while rattling like a lawnmower. You rotated it between rooms like a precious relic, and if someone moved it without asking, prepare for war. At night, you prayed for a breeze. You slept with no sheets. You sweat into the pillow. And if you had siblings, everyone argued about who got the good side of the fan. Box fans, oscillating fans, those tiny desk ones, you tried them all. Sometimes you even tried stacking them, one pointing in, one pointing out. Genius in theory. Today, air conditioning is a click away. Back then, you just laid still, listened to that fan hum, and told yourself, it is not that hot. You knew the couch was done. Getting creative with school projects when you had no fancy supplies was an art form in itself. You did not have glitter, foam boards, or expensive markers. You had a brown paper grocery bag, maybe some string, a glue stick on its last legs, and your imagination. Posters were drawn with pencil and traced over with pen. Science projects were built from cereal boxes and toilet paper rolls. You scavenged for materials, empty cans, broken toys, scraps of construction paper from last year's stash. You figured out how to make a diorama with cardboard, paper clips, and wishful thinking. And when it came time to present, you stood tall, even if your volcano did not erupt or your poster sagged at the corners, because you knew how much effort it took. You watched your parents help cut, tape, and fix things the night before, even after working a long shift. There was no last-minute trip to the art store, no spare $20 bill for decorations, just grit and a lot of tape. Sometimes you got weird looks from classmates. Sometimes you got a teacher who noticed the effort and gave you a nod. Either way, you learned that it is not about what you have. It is about what you can do with what you have. And looking back, some of those rough, lopsided projects meant more than any perfect trifold ever could. It came in a plain metal tin with an old-fashioned logo and a stubborn lid that never quite sealed. Clabber Girl baking powder was a quiet fixture in 1970s kitchens, especially in households where every meal had to be made from scratch. If you were poor, you could not afford pre-made this or pre-mix that. But with a bag of flour, some lard or oil, and Clabber Girl, you could bake just about anything. Biscuits, pancakes, cornbread, dumplings. Clabber Girl was the unseen helper that made the rise happen. That made the crust a little fluffier, the edges a little lighter. It had no real flavor, it just worked. And when you were feeding 6 people on one paycheck, something that worked was worth more than anything. You scooped it with a bent spoon. You measured it by memory. You passed it down from mother to daughter like it was tradition. There were no tricks, no marketing gimmicks, just a can that did its job week after week. If you baked your own bread because you could not afford the store version, Clabber Girl was there. If you mixed up pancake batter on Sunday mornings with powdered milk and rationed eggs, Clabber Girl was there. It never made the front of the recipe card, but it was always in the ingredients. In homes where the oven was a lifeline and a bag of flour had to stretch, Clabber Girl was the brand you counted on without even thinking about it. Used board games from garage sales were like treasure chests missing half the jewels, but you still played. You found them in cardboard boxes next to chipped mugs and old lamps. Sometimes they were just $1, sometimes free if the seller liked you. You brought them home and opened the box like it held gold. The pieces were often scattered, the rules were missing, The dice were from a different game entirely, but you and your siblings made it work. You turned bottle caps into player tokens, dug marbles out of drawers to roll as dice, and rewrote every rule until it felt like yours. You argued over who got to be banker and who had to play as the bent card. You used broken crayons to keep score and taped up torn boards with band-aids if that was all you had. Sometimes you made up a whole new game from scraps, calling it a custom edition, and you swore it was better than the one in stores. You rewrote the rules, made up your own, and argued until someone gave in. You replaced lost pawns with buttons, coins, or jelly beans. When the spinner broke, you made one out of paper. When the board tore, you taped it up with whatever you had. It was not perfect, but it was yours, and you played like the game still had magic in it. Because when the world gave you scraps, you still found a way to play. You did not need the latest version. You needed a rainy day, a few friends, and a table. That was enough. Roller skating on sidewalks was a thrill that turned every cracked stretch of pavement into an adventure. The skates were simple, cheap models that clamped onto your shoes with a little key you always managed to misplace. They were noisy, they pinched your feet, and they never felt quite secure. But once you got rolling, none of that mattered. Kids zoomed down driveways, wobbled along sidewalks, and occasionally crashed into hedges or lampposts, laughing the whole time. Poor kids did not need a roller rink with flashing lights and music. The street outside was their playground. Neighbors got used to the clatter of wheels, the shouts of kids daring each other to go faster, or the occasional cry when someone took a tumble. Skinned knees were badges of honor, proof that you were brave enough to try tricks or push yourself just a little faster. On warm weekends, it seemed like half the block was out skating, sharing keys, swapping wheels, or helping each other up after a fall. Looking back, those clunky sidewalk skates were more than toys. They were freedom, adventure, and laughter all rolled into one. If you grew up without much in the 1980s, you knew what winter prep really meant. Plastic bread bags stuffed inside your sneakers. Wonder Bread, Sunbeam, store brand, it did not matter, as long as it slid over your socks like poor kid armor. You slipped your foot in and hoped it stayed dry on the walk to school. Every kid sounded like they were walking through potato chip bags. If your bag tore halfway through the walk, you were stuck squishing all day. And heaven help you if it was the cinnamon raisin bag. It smelled weird. Sometimes the bread logo still peeked out of the top of your shoe like a fashion statement no one asked for. Teachers never said anything, because they knew. Half the class probably had sandwich packaging in their boots. If you were extra fancy, your mom double-bagged them like you were prepping for a flood. It did not keep your feet warm, but it made you feel clever. Today, people spend big on waterproof socks. Back then, you used what you had in the kitchen drawer. And when spring came, you hung up the bread bags like snow gear. You did not have a Barbie. Ice cream truck visits, when they happened, were a full-blown event. You could hear the jingle from 2 blocks away, a tinny little tune that made your heart race. You dropped everything, ran inside, begged for change. Your mom might dig through the junk drawer or check under the couch cushions. Maybe she had $1, maybe not. But if she did, you ran like your life depended on it, barefoot, out the door, the sun hot on the pavement. And when you got there, panting, sweating, you stared up at that little window like it was heaven. Firecracker popsicles, chocolate tacos, snow cones in foam cups. The truck was a rolling treasure chest. You did not go every day. It was rare, a treat. The kind of thing that happened once a month, if that. But when it did, it felt like winning. You ate slow to make it last. You compared with friends. You guarded your cone like a hawk, knowing it could fall at any moment. That joy, that 5 minutes of sticky fingers and ice cream smiles, was priceless. It was not just about dessert. It was about feeling normal, about having what the other kids had, about being part of something sweet in a world that was often sour. Metal can with a red label and a smiling cartoon chef. And if you were poor in the 1970s, it probably fed you more times than you could count. Chef Boyardee spaghetti was cheap, filling, and easy enough for a kid to make. You popped the lid, dumped it into a pot or a bowl, heated it until it bubbled, and called it a hot meal. The noodles were soft, the sauce was sweet, the meat was there, somewhere. But it was dinner, and when money was low, that was more than good enough. Some families ate it straight from the can when they could not afford electricity or gas. Others stretched it with toast, crackers, or the last slice of American cheese. It was the kind of food that got you through a hard day and maybe the next one too. Chef Boyardee was not about flavor, it was about function. It fed kids when there was no one to cook. It kept stomachs from growling at school. It sat in the cupboard as a quiet backup plan. Always waiting, always there. It might not have been anyone's favorite, but it earned its place on the shelf. Milk jug caps and bottle tops were not meant to be toys, but we made them one. When you had no money for real action figures or accessories, you dug through the recycling bin and found magic in the mundane. The plastic caps from milk jugs became wheels, shields, tokens, or coins. Metal bottle caps were more dangerous, but made great currency in imaginary games. You lined them up, flipped them, traded them, and pretended they meant something big. Your living room carpet became a battlefield. The caps were soldiers. The couch legs were castle towers. A handful of tops meant you were rich, at least in the economy of imagination. Some kids melted the edges with sunlight and a magnifying glass, reshaping them into weird inventions. Others colored them with markers and gave them names like Power Cap or Laser Shield. You could play marbles-style games with them, flicking them across the sidewalk or kitchen floor for points. And if you lost one, no big deal. You would just finish your drink and start again. It was endless, cheap, and somehow way more fun than anything wrapped in plastic at the store. Poor kids turned garbage into gold long before it was trendy. They were not pretty, but they were yours. And all they cost was a little creativity. Church carnivals and potlucks were social events that brought whole communities together for free fun. The churchyard filled with rickety rides, ring toss games, and tables stacked high with cakes and pies. Children darted between booths clutching raffle tickets, hoping to win small prizes like a toy or a homemade quilt. The food was endless. Casseroles, salads, and fried chicken brought by families who cooked with love, even if they had little to spare. Music played from speakers, neighbors chatted, and laughter mixed with the sounds of squeaky Ferris wheels. For many poor families in the 1970s, these gatherings were the closest thing to a festival they could attend. There was no entrance fee, no need to worry about buying dinner, and no judgment for bringing simple dishes. The spirit of sharing meant everyone left full, happy, and a little more connected to the people around them. These events gave kids magical memories of bright lights and full plates without costing their parents a cent. Did not go to the store. You went to the cabinet under the sink. If it said soap somewhere on the bottle, it was fair game. Dish soap? Sure. Hand soap? Why not? Once, someone used body wash and said their hair felt squeaky. That was not a compliment. Sometimes you grabbed the generic all-purpose cleaner and hoped for the best. You poured a blob into your palm, lathered it up, and told yourself, "It smells like lemons. It must be safe." Your hair came out flat, stiff, or sticky, but it was technically clean. Mission accomplished. If you were lucky, there was that leftover hotel shampoo from 2 summers ago, or the bottle that had 2 drops left and had to be turned upside down for a week. No one judged you, because everyone did it. Budget hair care was not a trend. It was a necessity. And when your hair dried, you just brushed it, ignored the weird texture, and went about your day. Because in a house where money was tight, being clean enough was plenty. If you grew up, sitting on plastic-covered furniture was a whole sensory experience you never forget. First, there was the sound, the squeak of skin against vinyl, especially in the summer. Then the feeling, sticky, sweaty, and just a little humiliating. That couch was off limits unless you had permission. You knew the rule. No roughhousing, no eating, no sitting with dirty clothes. Because under that thick sheet of plastic was the good couch, the one your mom was saving for company, for holidays, for someday. So instead of enjoying it, you sat stiffly, legs sticking, shirt clinging to your back. If you had shorts on, forget it. Peeling yourself off felt like a full-body wax. But even with the discomfort, there was something sacred about that couch. It symbolized pride. Even if the rest of the house was cramped or old, that furniture was preserved like it was brand new. Your mom vacuumed it through the plastic. Your aunt complimented it when she visited. And you? You tried not to shift too much, hoping not to get yelled at. It was ridiculous, but also real. It said, "We may not have much, but we take care of what we've got." That plastic was a barrier between the present and the hope of better days. It started with a flash of light and a voice over the loudspeaker. "Attention Kmart shoppers." And just like that, the crowd moved. Kmart's blue light specials were not just discounts, they were events. For poor families in the 1970s, they were also the only way you ever got something new, or something extra. You never really planned to catch one. You just hoped you were there at the right time. One minute you were walking past socks and Tupperware, and the next minute you were part of a stampede around a flashing cart in the middle of the aisle. Clothes, toys, kitchen gadgets, it could be anything. The magic was in the mystery. You never knew what would be marked down, but you knew if you acted fast enough, you might walk away with something you could otherwise never afford. A new shirt, a toy for Christmas, a set of mixing bowls that would last you 10 years. Kids got excited. Parents held their breath at the register. And for a few minutes, that blue light made you feel like you had gotten lucky. Like you had scored a win in a week of budgeting and scraping by. Blue light specials were chaotic, messy, and unforgettable. They gave people who had very little a reason to smile, a reason to spend $5 on something just for once. And when you caught one, it felt like it was meant for you. In a time when money was tight, those quick flashes of blue felt like hope. Rubber balls from the grocery store gumball machine were a childhood gamble wrapped in plastic and possibility. You spotted them while standing in line, eyeing the vending machine next to the gum and cheap toys. If you were lucky enough to have a spare coin, usually from digging under couch cushions, you'd drop it in, turn the knob, and hope for a good one. The ball plunked down with a satisfying thunk. Sometimes it was clear with glitter inside. Sometimes it was neon or had weird swirls like lava. And sometimes, let's be honest, it was a dud. Too soft, not bouncy or flat on one side. But when it was a good one, you knew it. You'd slam it to the sidewalk and watch it bounce higher than your head. You chased it down driveways, into bushes, or out into the street while someone yelled at you to watch for cars. You played wall ball, foursquare, or just bounced it off the side of the house for hours. It was fast, unpredictable, perfect. Even when it bounced straight into the gutter, you swore you could get it back. And sometimes you did. The best ones lasted a summer. The rest rolled under the fridge or got eaten by the lawnmower. But for one coin, one twist, and 1 second of suspense, you had your whole afternoon figured out. On a time, thumbing a ride was just another way to get around. You stuck out your arm, trusted a stranger, and ended up somewhere new. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was woven into the fabric of American youth culture. It was impulsive, bold, and strangely ordinary. Backpackers with handwritten cardboard signs, college students heading home for the weekend, young dreamers chasing concerts, freedom, or just a place to sleep that night. The road was a friend, not a threat. Of course, it came with risk, but so did living. Trust was the currency of the era. You paid with eye contact, conversation, and the silent agreement that we were all just trying to get somewhere. Today, the idea seems reckless, dangerous, unthinkable. Our paranoia has grown louder than our sense of community. Stories of harm and headlines of fear took the wheel, and the open road became a closed door. But ask anyone who stuck out their thumb back then, and they will tell you about the kindness of strangers, the rides that turned into friendships, and the way the world felt a little more connected. Hitchhiking was not just transportation. It was a dare, a freedom. You had Fashion Doll. Her box said just like Barbie, but that was a generous description. Her head was wobbly, her hair was glued on in chunks, and her knees did not bend. But she was yours. Her arm might snap off while you were brushing her hair, but you popped it back in like it was normal. Her shoes were 2 left feet, and her dress was made of tissue paper. But she was in every adventure you imagined. You made her a house out of a shoebox. Her car was the laundry basket. She lived in the same dream world as Barbie, just with fewer joints and more glitter fallout. You knew not to brush her hair too hard or it would all come out in one go. Still, you loved her like she was real. If you were lucky, she came with 1 outfit and 1 plastic purse that did not open. But she was your fashion doll, even if her head fell off every few days. In the world of make-believe, she was fabulous. Just do not drop her. She might not survive the fall. You never bought Tupperware. Twister was the game that got people off the couch and tangled in each other's limbs. Released in 1966, it came with a plastic mat covered in colored circles and a spinner that decided your next move. Left hand red, right foot green. Before you knew it, you were stretching across the mat in a precarious pose, face pressed against someone's knee, hoping no one slipped. It was silly, physical, and weirdly intimate. Some parents called it indecent. Some schools banned it. But kids loved it. So did teenagers. It broke the ice at parties, sparked laughter between siblings, and gave families something active to do together. It was as much about falling over as it was about winning. The rustle of the mat, the sound of giggles as someone toppled, the concentration in trying to stay upright, it was all part of the fun. Twister took no prep and delivered instant chaos. It did not care about strategy. It cared about balance, luck, and how far you could stretch without collapsing. And for many, it was the first time a game made you move, laugh, and fall down all in one messy, unforgettable moment. Shrinky Dink with slim, dusty packets, each one promising breakfast in under 2 minutes. Quaker instant oatmeal was one of those things that showed up in every low-income kitchen in the 1970s, not because it was anyone's favorite, but because it was quick, filling, and just enough. You tore open the packet, poured it into a bowl, added hot water, and stirred. Sometimes it thickened too much. Sometimes it was runny, but you ate it anyway. The flavors were barely there: maple and brown sugar, apples and cinnamon, peaches and cream. Mostly it was sugar, flakes, and memory. It felt warm, even if it was thin. It felt like something real, even if it came out of a packet. For moms rushing to get kids to school or kids fending for themselves before the bus, it was a lifesaver. Some households stretched 1 packet across 2 kids. Others added extra oats to make it go further. And every now and then, if you were lucky, you would find a box with a variety pack. Something about the illusion of choice made it taste better. Quaker instant oatmeal was not glamorous. It was not hearty. But it was breakfast. It was the kind of food that got you through. Hand-me-down stuffed animals were more than toys. They were survivors. They had missing eyes, frayed seams, and patches that told their own stories. You never got them brand new. They came from cousins, older siblings, or a neighbor down the street. Some were passed down so many times, no one remembered who bought them in the first place. They smelled like closets and worn fabric. Their fur was matted, their stuffing uneven. But they were soft in all the right places and firm enough to hold when you needed something solid. You gave them names even if the tag was gone. You tucked them under blankets, took them on road trips, and cried into them without embarrassment. They sat on your bed when the world felt too big, and they listened without ever saying a word. Even when they started to fall apart, you begged not to throw them away. Because they had been through everything with you, and when you had nothing new, something old still meant love. And sometimes the most beat-up stuffed animal was the one with the biggest heart. They were worn, they were ugly, they were perfect, and if you were poor in the 70s, chances are your favorite toy came with a history already stitched in. Watching reruns together on a single television was a family ritual in homes that often had just one set for everyone. The television itself was usually a bulky box with dials, rabbit ear antennas wrapped in aluminum foil, and a fuzzy screen that needed a smack on the side to work properly. Entire families crowded into the living room, kids sprawled on the carpet, parents on the couch, maybe an older sibling leaning against the wall. There was no arguing over channels, Most homes only got a handful, and reruns of old sitcoms or variety shows were a guarantee. Families laughed together at jokes they had heard dozens of times, sang along with jingles, or sat in silence during dramatic scenes. The glow of the screen filled the room, and even though the shows were repeats, the feeling of watching together was always fresh. Snacks were rare. Maybe popcorn popped on the stove or crackers with cheese. But the real treat was the togetherness. Poor families did not need multiple televisions or cable subscriptions. One screen, one channel, and one shared experience were more than enough to bring everyone closer. Looking back, those rerun nights were less about the shows themselves and more about the memories made sitting side by side. Sequins and leather, smudged eyeliner and busted amps, glam punk was the glorious, greasy collision of everything too beautiful and too angry to fit in. It took the sparkle of glam rock and smashed it into the snarling mouth of punk, and what came out was electric. The New York Dolls looked like they fell out of a glitter bomb during a street fight. They strutted and screamed, smeared with makeup, wearing heels and ripped fishnets, flipping the bird at every rule in music and fashion. This was not about perfection, it was about presence, about noise, about guts. Glam punk walked like it owned the stage and did not care if it fell off. It was funny, too, how seriously it made fun of itself. There was always a wink behind the mascara, a joke in every riff. But underneath the chaos was something real, something raw, a message wrapped in tinsel. Before microwaves took over the world, there was Jiffy Pop. That iconic silver foil pan with the wire handle looked more like a science experiment than a snack. You placed it over the burner, turned the heat to medium, and waited. First, nothing. Then a rustle. Then a pop. Then a full-on explosion of sound as the silver dome started to rise. It puffed up like magic, growing rounder and louder until it looked like a shiny balloon about to burst. You shook the handle gently, trying not to burn the bottom. The anticipation was everything. Kids gathered around the stove like it was a campfire. Parents pretended not to worry, it might go up in flames. And then it was done. You tore open the top and reached inside, burning your fingers on the edge, of course, for a handful of hot, buttery popcorn. It did not matter if half of it was burnt and the other half still kernels. It was the experience, the ritual. The popcorn was secondary. The fun was in the show. Jiffy Pop was not just a snack. It was a performance. And if you ever had a movie night that started with that sizzling silver pan, you remember the thrill of the balloon. Flap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. If you remember, Zayre was your go-to store when you needed something quick, cheap, and in style, at least for a while. With its wide aisles and even wider sales, it felt like the kind of place that always had what you needed, even if you did not know what that was. Kids' clothes, home goods, a new cassette deck. It was all there. Zayre thrived in the late 1970s and early 1980s. It understood the American shopper's desire for convenience without breaking the bank. But competition was growing. Target was sleeker, Kmart was faster, and Walmart was, well, everywhere. Zayre struggled to define itself in this new retail landscape. Its stores started to feel tired. The deals were not as exciting. The branding got fuzzy. Shoppers noticed. The decline was not sudden, but it was steady. By the end of the 1980s, Zayre began selling off locations and assets. Eventually, it folded into other chains, and the name disappeared. Another once familiar sign taken down, replaced by something newer and shinier. But for those who grew up with it, Zayre was more than just a store. It was part of their weekly routine. Now it is just a piece of shopping history. The Brady Bunch was a family like no other, and yet it felt like everyone's family. 6 kids, 2 parents, and a house full of laughter, chaos, and pastel-colored drama. Premiering in 1969, but becoming a cultural mainstay throughout the 1970s, it was pure television comfort food. Every episode ended with a smile, a hug, and a catchy lesson on sharing, honesty, or sibling rivalry. It was not edgy. It was not deep. But it was warm. And for kids whose homes were not always so perfect, the Brady Bunch offered a glimpse of what harmony could look like, even if it was idealized. Mike and Carol never yelled. Alice the housekeeper always had a one-liner ready. And the kids? They were just messy enough to be real. You picked a favorite. You sang along with the theme song. You quoted Jan's iconic "Marcia, Marcia, Marcia." It was pop culture innocence. A time capsule of bell-bottoms, perms, and avocado-colored kitchens. And even if you rolled your eyes at the cheese, deep down you loved that family, because they showed that even the most blended bunch could belong. And that felt revolutionary in its own gentle way. You could smell them before you saw them. Pies. Which sign of being poor in the 80s hit closest to home for you? Share your story in the comments, tap like if this brought back memories you almost forgot, and subscribe so you never miss the next trip into the past.